Good morning. Okay, welcome everybody. Approval of agenda. Do we have, what have we got, Tyler?
So just some on-table items. We have one package for item 4.1 regarding Birch, K through O. We have a package 6.2. There's actually two there. It goes from A through H. And then one on-table item 10.3 regarding the dock bylaw.
Okay.
Your item there.
Right.
There are some additional letters that arrived first thing this morning that I was unable to prepare. They will be part of the revised agenda to include late and on-table items that will be published.
Okay. Fair enough. Any other changes or additions to the agenda? Okay, motion to adopt.
Can I add?
That depends. You know how much I love people adding things to the agenda 1 second before a meeting starts. Is this extremely benign and just something you want to share?
I was just wondering if we could have an update of how things are going with BC Housing, given we've got a few
Yes.
items to do with housing on the
I can
agenda.
give you that instantly. James is not back from holiday yet.
Okay, so there's no update? No, things are still the same, okay.
Okay, motion to adopt. Seconded, all in favor, passed unanimously. Okay, public comments, Tyler.
All right, this morning, Alice Nixon first, please.
Well, mine is related to the Birch Housing Project.
Yes,
That's fine.
So Allison,
Okay.
what we have is we have the public comment section first.
Oh, sorry.
Then we go
Sorry.
through our consent agenda, then we have delegation. And
Okay.
Birch will be under the delegation portion of the agenda. So please join us, have a seat.
Thank you. This is simply a letter which I received from Chloe Dirks, who is struggling with housing. After a glorious Bowen home birth of our second daughter on New Year's Eve, we were on cloud 9. Life was undoubtedly hard with a newborn and 4-year-old, but our spirits were high. At the end of January, we were given notice to vacate by our landlord when our newborn was just 3 weeks old. It was so anxiety-producing and destabilizing. How could we possibly manage a move? It totally popped our happy bonding with new baby bubble. We found we were suddenly in a totally different rental market than when we moved a year prior. Everything available was either way too small or way too expensive. My husband makes a good income, but we were disheartened to find that we may be priced off Bowen Island, the place where we have a tight community of friends, support and deep roots. The place we finally found after months of searching is twice the price per square foot compared to our previous rental. We're a family of 4 moving into 700 square foot space. It's smaller than our basement suite we lived in as university students in Vancouver, but now we also have 2 kids. It causes me much anxiety trying to imagine day-to-day life in such a small place. We will no longer have room to have friends over for dinner. We've just gotten rid of tons of stuff. Partly that feels good, but there are also things I would have wanted to keep. I'm giving up soap and body product making because we won't have room to store the supplies. I'm giving away all my art supplies, lots of my daughter's toys and games. We have no room for a desk for my husband to work on from home. I can't use a baby swing for the baby because it won't fit. So yeah, some would say first world problems, but seriously, I do not know how we are in this situation. We will be paying way higher rent than our friends' mortgage payments on huge houses. It feels so demoralizing. I just want a home.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Allison. Did you want to submit that letter or?
Sure.
That would be fine. Thank you very much. Next up, we have Mr. Ronnie Dyke.
Reference your zoning RZ 02 2017. I'd first like to clarify what we're rezoning. We applied for 6 new floating structures, or 6% of the marina's berth. We already have zoned for 3 units at 2% of the marina's berth. Currently, we have 3 float houses. Vanessa's float house, our offices and toilet that you consider a float house. It's the building at the foot of the gangway, and our current rental unit. We plan to replace the current rental unit or float house with a new one eventually, sometime in this process. The percentages that you guys use, or the muni uses, are confusing. I just use numbers, 5, 6, 7, as opposed to try to get it into percentages. This zoning is all about our staff. We need staff to retain quality service at Dock Morgan's and the Union Steamship Marina. They need housing on Bowen, particularly the busy summer months. We've had to delay opening of Dock's deck and the dining room because we don't have anyone to run it. We'll lose our quality of service. We've started working on this rezoning over a year ago. We can't wait 4 to 6 years that zoning typically takes us to start construction or wait for other housing to come online. We continue to keep our planning, your planning, and building departments up to date on our progress as it has evolved. And it has evolved. You and your staff are welcome to visit and inspect our progress at any time. Our plans have and continue to evolve, primarily to keep the economical and make it rentable for our staff. We started with a 2-story structure, nice roof lines, a lot of space, a concrete form base, as most houseboats have, with the foam supporting it. We quickly had to shift gears because that cost us at least $150,000 just for the base. And it caused us to shift all of the construction off-site on the mainland, which brings in more cost. So we've used a different foam system, and we've covered it with a poly system. That poly system is the same as they use in truck bed liners. It's very strong. It's designed to contain the foam. We've used aluminum frames and a SIP construction method, and you're all familiar with SIPs. It's extremely strong and very well insulated. It's lighter weight, has greater shear, and allows cost to be realistic. Our naval engineer reports that the current one is still on the cusp of stability. We realize that, and we have designed it so that we can add ballast as needed, but we'll continue to put it in the water and do on-water stability testing as opposed to trying to add additional weight at this time. We're now working on a new design that the rest of the houseboats will be on with a much lower center of gravity. It will only have a storage loft or attic space above, no bathrooms upstairs, and it will be more of a tiny house concept as opposed to really a float house. We've selected an onboard sewage system that is self-contained and has been approved for use in both fresh and salt water. We've also backed it up with our current pump-out system if it doesn't work for whatever reason and for cleaning. We've also, Environmental Canada, Fisheries and Oceans, and floating log camps, lodges up and down the coast all utilize this system. The coastal health jurisdiction does not apply here because it's an in-water system. And yes, it's primarily for our staff's use. That's what we're doing it for. And yes, if staff is available, or if they're available and staff aren't using them in the winter, we'll try to rent them out. Typically to construction workers that like a small, inexpensive area. Our original rental goal was approximately $800 per unit to our staff. At the current cost, the way they're coming in, at least on this first one, we think that's unachievable. We don't know at this time until we get all those building costs in, and that's why we proceeded with this, so we have a better understanding of what we're doing, not only structurally, but economically. And as soon as the building costs and financing are arranged, we'll know what those rates will be.
Okay, thanks, Ronnie.
And I do have, for your information, references from up and down the coast and coastal, what do you call it, Environmental Canada and et cetera. I've given these earlier to you, but I will pass them on again.
Thanks, Ronnie.
Any questions?
Okay,
Very complete.
okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ronnie.
So just word to the audience, very few of our presentations would be allowed to go that long. It's a major item on our agenda today, so giving Ronnie a little extra time there.
Next up there, we have Alex Jurgensen.
Morning, Alex. Have a seat. Your chair's right there behind you.
So I'm here on a personal note regarding the covenant that pertains to 380 Cardina Drive. That's the Bowen Island Lodge. As it pertains to the principal use group of the blind, visually impaired, and deafblind. I myself have been involved with the Campo project for 18 years, the last 8 of which I've spent as the project coordinator and a rehabilitation instructor. First of all, I'd like to extend a thank you to the municipality for having created such a protected facility as the Bowen Island Lodge. By that covenant, it is Canada's only legally protected training, meeting, and recreation space for the blind, visually impaired, and deafblind. Something that is sorely needed in Canada. And it's fortunate enough to be in a community that has over 60 years of experience with high traffic of blind people, and that has left a mark on this community. The amount of dignity that blind people receive here versus anywhere else in Canada, it is shocking to see the difference. Prior to CNIB even having a stronghold here on Island, there was programming for blind, visually impaired. Training and recreation meeting with blind, visually impaired, and deafblind, we've undertaken significant work to realize and research the economic, social, and community benefits that upholding the covenant would actually provide to the community. And those go above and beyond anything that can be currently found by running it as anything other than how it states in the covenant. So protecting it for training, meeting, and recreation does bring a substantial amount of social recreation, social, economic, and community benefits. I definitely hope to be back as part of the delegation that will speak before council on this matter further, but I would like to end on a personal note to ask council to consider upholding the covenant as it stands, and to continue to ensure that as the blind, visually impaired, and deafblind community moves forward, that we can grow together with the community here on Bowen for years to come. On another note, I would like to turn and throw support to Birch, who I understand has a delegation later today, and say that as somebody who's visually impaired and on fixed income, I definitely see the need for what Birch is doing and ask council to throw their support to them as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, this is Aiden Statton. Go ahead, Aiden.
Thank you for having me today. I am also here to speak about the covenant at 380 Cordina Drive. And giving more of a personal note, I've had the pleasure of attending camps at that lodge, that facility, since I was around 10, and off and on I've been there as camper and staff, and since the blind community has had more of an input in the running of the lodge after 2011, I've been happy to see more of the intimate workings of it, and I'm interested to help it continue. I believe that all Canadians, regardless of disability or financial status, should get what they pay for in taxes and should be able to live and enjoy their lives freely. I was disheartened to hear of the woman this morning who, as well as losing opportunities to spend fun time with her children, she's lost the ability to create in the form of art and bring more money to herself and possibly more unique art to the island. So I look forward to doing all in my power to help the blindness community realize the potential of its protected facility and help the Bowen Island community benefit from a more direct involvement from the blind people of Canada to make this a better place for everyone. Thank you.
All right, that's all we have for public comments. Dave, Mayor?
Okay. Thank you, everyone. On to the consent agenda. Is there anything that anyone would like to hold? Yes.
I have a question, and it's just regarding 3.7, the BIMTech resolutions. When we just receive them like this in the consent agenda, I just want to confirm that we're just receiving them, we're not endorsing them or passing them.
That's right.
Correct?
It's staff recommendations dealt with through upcoming planner report.
Great. Okay,
Yes.
because they're pulled out of the minutes and they're there, I just always have this question and thought I would ask it again. Thank you.
If I could just speak to that just
Yep.
briefly. There is a recommendation at the end of that that you are actually voting on. It is the request for twice a year, the council refer the request for twice a year painting of cross-hatching areas to staff for comment.
Yeah.
Okay.
The rest are usually dealt with.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, anything else? Yes.
I'm gonna pull 3.8 because part of the resolution should be for different.
Okay, so this is under the new business, move to a closed meeting. Can we agree to just strike that at this point and leave it at that?
3.8.
3.8.
Oh, I'm sorry. Recommend receive. Okay, sure. 3.8 is pulled, put it at the end of the agenda. Anything else? Okay. Motion seconded. All in favor? Passed unanimously. And consent delegations. This morning we have the Bowen Island Resilient Community Housing.
Yes.
Robin and Daniel.
I'm going to be speaking.
Daniel
Daniel's
joining you,
here.
or
He's
you?
going to, he's supporting from.
Oral support. Robin is our excellent representative. Oral support.
Here, here.
Robin?
Yeah.
I just want to wrestle with this blind for a moment.
Yes. Okay, I'll do my best to enunciate. I've just got my phone as a timer here because it's on airplane mode, so it won't go off, but I just sort of want to be conscious of time. So, great. Oh, there we go. There's a presentation. So first of all, thank you so much for welcoming here today. It's exciting to be speaking about this, and I know you guys have probably each individually heard little bits about it, so it's great to kind of have it all come together and be speaking to you about it. And before I start, because I know not everybody had a chance, and it's a better use of our time, not for every single person to speak, I know you've seen the letters that arrived, and I also just want to ask people in the audience who's here to support our application. Just put up your hands so we can see. Okay, thank you so much for being here. I'm not going to go on too much about that because I think you've read the letters and you get it. I'm just going to jump into the presentation. So I'll introduce a little bit about our organization. I think most of you are familiar with it, so I'll probably go over that fairly quickly. The project evolution, where we got to, the proposal, some of the site options, timeline and funding, which is always important, and then the actual formal request. So Bowen Island Resilient Community Housing is a registered nonprofit society. Our purpose is to develop and manage diverse, permanent, affordable housing on Bowen Island. And it was established a couple of years ago under a different name. You might have been familiar with it, Foxglove Community Housing Trust. Tim Wake started it. He started it with a bit of a different vision, and then it kind of went dormant for a little while, and when he and I met and I decided to take it on, it was really important to me that it have Bowen Island in the name, because I really wanted to create housing for Bowen Island. So we changed the name, and it's sort of with our renewed focus and my new leadership. And we're also a member of the BC Nonprofit Housing Association. And they have wonderful resources online, of which I've been taking some. You'll see some of them reflected here in the proposal. And I'm also attending, they have a course that I'll be doing over the next month that's called like Ready, Set, Build or something like that. And they have a conference at the end of May that I'll be attending as well. One of the sessions I was excited to see is about new funding opportunities. So I'll be able to report back on that as well as we move forward. So our board at Birch is Tim Wake, Marla Zucht, Peter Courtney, Tom Matson, and John Sorensen. And I just wanted to add that note because they've been the same board members, which is wonderful since the beginning. We'll probably have a bit of a changeover. One or two of the members are planning to step down, and we will be looking for a couple new, especially Bowen Islanders. But I just wanted to point out Tim Wake, who you probably know is a very experienced person with affordable housing, and Marla Zucht. There are two most valuable board members. Marla Zucht is the manager of the Whistler Housing Authority, and she's been doing that work up there for about 15 years. And she's a mentor to me in this process and has gone through the funding applications that we're about to go through, so she's a fantastic resource to have on our board. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of our purposes. People running. One of our purpose statements is to develop residential housing projects to be sold or rented at prices affordable to individuals. And we do state this $40,000 to $120,000 range. And I just wanted to point out, I think we will be revising that to about $20,000. I know I got some feedback from people. And again, these were kind of left over from a couple of years ago when it was a slightly different organization. I'm going to skip over some of these because, again, if you have more questions, we can get into it. They are available on our website. So the evolution was, and I just wanted this for continuity, Daniel Heald, I believe, came to you in September. And so he spoke to you, and you went ahead and directed him to go to staff to talk about municipal sites. He brought myself on, Bob McGilvery, who's a retired architect, he's here as well. So we went through the 4 lots that staff presided us, and after we analyzed, we really found that lot 3 was the best option. We'll get into that a bit later, but I just wanted to show the evolution of where we've come from. And so we started on the road of sort of working out design, feasibility, and then we realized, you know what, we shouldn't be getting into these details. What we need to do first is ask to be your partner. And that's really where we're coming from on this project, is we're the nonprofit housing society, and we want to be the municipality's partner in creating housing on Bowen. And so that's why we thought, no, let's stop, let's just come to you, ask for this partnership, and then we can get into those details and move forward. So the team working on this project is me, Robin Fenton as the acting executive director of Birch, Daniel Heald, who you know is the owner of the Ready Potato, and Bob McGilvery as a retired architect. And of course, as the project moves forward, we'll have more people on our team, probably a couple more volunteers to help with this sort of steering, and of course we'll have consultants for the feasibility, architects and engineers as we move forward. And one thing you'll see comes up a bit later, and this is one I learned, and really, you guys probably know me, I love engaging with the community. One thing that came out through the nonprofit housing little course that I did online was they said it's really important to engage with the community when you're doing these projects, and I thought that's perfect, right up my alley. So one of the things as part of this project is I really want to establish, and I've just loosely named it, a project stakeholder committee. And I would like that to be made up of a variety of people from the community, including youth. I thought that was such a great idea. So some youth from the island, people at all different income levels, housing situations, and have them as this stakeholder committee that we would check in with at certain points of the project to make sure we're on track, get their feedback back, get their ideas. And I also see lots of opportunities for collaboration. I was inspired, I don't know if any of you have seen the modular housing project at Main and Terminal that BC Housing built. They have a beautiful mural and lots of artwork. So I thought, given Bowen, there's lots of opportunity for collaboration as well for some artwork on the project. But again, that's details in the future. So our proposal, I'm just checking. my time, I'm doing okay. So we propose to, so the proposal, and this is from our application, we propose to develop and manage affordable rental housing project on a portion of Lot 3 of the community lands. The project will be approximately 20 units of secure rental housing for Bowen Island residents. Units will be a variety of size. We're hoping for studios up to 3 bedrooms, and a variety, what's missing there, a variety of levels. So you know, below market, at market, whatever the kind of feasibility study allows us to achieve this project. But certainly we'd be aiming for as many units as possible in that below market range, given that we're asking for the land for a nominal cost. It could potentially include commercial spaces on the ground floor, and I'll sort of point that out when we look at the site plan, if that's appropriate. If not, it would be 100% housing. And the size, again, is approximately 16,000 to 18,000 square feet. It could be one large building, it could be smaller buildings. And again, I'm being a little bit, we're open here, because I think the idea today is to get to agree to a partnership. And then as we move forward through a feasibility and getting a little bit more into the details, we can determine what those specifics are. And I also wanted to add, I think I didn't put this in there, is I have quite ambitious energy efficiency and durability goals. If we as an organization are going to own this building and operate it for hopefully at least 50 years, we're asking for a 90-year lease, so let's say we're aiming for 90 years. The energy use in the building, and especially how that is passed on to the tenants, is really important. So why I say that is, I would love to see us invest a little bit more into the building and go for a very ambitious energy level. And I think you guys had the talk about the step code and the different levels of energy efficiency in buildings. So I'd like to really aim high there. So it may be that the building itself, the construction of it, costs a little bit more, and rents, in fact, may be a little bit higher, but the goal being that the tenants' utility bills are significantly lower, so that it would at least balance out in the end. Anyways, I just wanted to make sure that was part of the proposal as well. So our ask, I wanted to put this in so you can keep that in mind as we continue to talk. So the formal ask for the project from the municipality is provide a portion of Lot 3 of the community lands to our organization in the form of a 90-year lease at a nominal rate with an option to renew. And I have to thank the health center, because they sort of paved the pathway, so I'm using a lot of their language you'll recognize. That you partner with Birch in approaching other levels of government for potential funding. So this includes BC Housing, CMHC, which I'll get into some details in a minute. Waive all municipal fees related to any rezoning, which I don't think we need. Development and building permits for the property. Provide municipal water and sewer service connections to the property line, and waive any fees or costs related to the works. And waive any property taxes on the land until the project reaches occupancy. I'd love it if we could waive it forever, but I'm not sure that that's an appropriate ask. So I thought at least until it reaches occupancy, and that was some advice from one of our board members who's been through this before. So the project goals, and again, this is directly from the application, so maybe I'll just breeze over this because I don't want to take up too much of our time, but essentially it's to provide secure housing, rental housing for people on the island, and really to keep Bowen a vibrant and diverse community, providing diverse units of housing is what we need. And I'll add just that last one, to be creative and innovative in the design, energy efficiency, and use of resources for this island. So quickly, I thought it might be useful. I just did a little bit of a search as to what are other communities doing. So the District of Tofino, there was a couple of news articles that came up. They've received $500,000 from the Rural Dividend Fund, which I know we're not strictly eligible for, though I think we're working on an exception. But anyways, they've received some funding. But their model is that they've got the District of Tofino, I believe, providing the land. They have a housing corporation that's been established, though from what I was reading, it kind of went dormant and then it's now come back. And they've also partnered, so it's a three-way partnership, with the Tofino Bible Fellowship, which is a registered charity, and they're taking this on to create housing. So I thought it was an interesting example of how the municipality, a housing corporation, and a nonprofit provider are working together to achieve that. The Sunshine Coast Affordable Housing Society has been formed, and I believe they're still at the early stages. It looks like, from what I can tell online, community engagement, getting agreement on a bit of land that's owned by the town of Gibsons, and they're aiming for 40 units, again, mixed sizes, mixed income levels. And it does state on their website they're looking to act as a community land trust for the Sunshine Coast, which is an interesting aspect. And then I think the Vancouver Affordable Housing Authority, which is just starting up, but I was reading on their website that they're also looking to use partnerships in terms of with community partners, development partners to build their properties using city-owned land. So again, I'll probably go through this quickly, but I just wanted to reiterate, and it's part of the application. How does this fit into Housing on Bowen, this application? One, the Vital Conversations, which I'm sure we're all aware of, the Community Foundation did, pretty much number one on the list, I think, was develop housing for all, and they went into quite a bit of detail in their report. And then from our Island Plan 2018, which is a lovely document, Priority D1, actively support diverse housing. Priority C3, enable and support community-driven initiatives. Strategic Pillar E, wisely manage ecological footprint, and that's where my energy efficiency goals come in and align with that. And Strategic Pillar F, robust and resilient local economy, and I sit on the Economic Development Committee. We've engaged with businesses, and I just keep hearing over and over again, and anecdotally, that housing is this huge issue, and we just heard from Rondi as well. So the businesses are struggling, workers are struggling, so to keep that resilient, sorry, I just realizing I have a typo there. Anyways, doesn't matter. Moving along, official community plan. There's a number of policies. Again, I don't think I'll read all of these, but there's a number of policies that address specifically provision of land for affordable housing. And one, where I'm just going to pull it out here, the last one, policy 368, that the municipality support providing service land owned by the municipality at no cost. And I believe it was written at the time where they thought the Bowen Island Housing Corporation was coming online, but it says, or an affordable housing provider that's a member of the BC Nonprofit Housing Association. And it does say subject to a public expression of interest. So I'm jumping the gun. There hasn't been a public call for expression of interest, but here we are. And they does nominate an amount of 1.25 acres for affordable housing. Maybe I'll just sort of pause and take a breath. I do tend to talk quickly when I'm excited about these things. And if there are any questions to date, if not, I'll just keep going and go into sort of the site options.
How did you arrive at the 1.25 acres? Because I wouldn't think the footprint of the building with 16,000 square feet is 1.25 acres.
That was from the official community plan. It says an initial amount of land for this purpose would be half an acre. Or
so you basically picked the half acre from the OCP rather than
so I'll show you
16,000 square feet neat.
Yeah, I'll show you the sites. And again, I'm very open to this. So I've come in, maybe I'll jump into that. So the site options, we were given a few different sites by the planners, and we honed in on lot 3. And mainly because of its topography, its access, ease of connections to water and sewer. And then when it became clear that the fire hall was going there and then the health center, it sort of seemed like a really easy fit for me to sort of develop that whole portion. So what I've done, and this is just purely, I'm hoping the planners haven't shaken, I've just sort of nominally named some areas A, B, C. And these aren't formal or legal, these are just for discussion purposes. And why I named them that is because for me they're kind of 3 distinct areas. And we had sort of started down the path of B, and that's what we've been working on for a while. And then again, like I say, a few months ago when the medical center came into that area, I thought, well, maybe it makes more sense to actually start talking about that area A. So I thought, I'm gonna put it on the table. And again, this is in the spirit of being in a partnership. We have a preference for A, and I can go into a little bit of why, but it's not A or nothing. I'm saying we prefer A, we're happy to work with you, and if you guys say no, we really want you to do B, we want to keep A for something else, let's do it. Like, I just want to get going on something. So our preference is for A, but let's talk, let's work together on it. So I'm just going to go into each one of the, so I'll show you, I'm sure you can see, so if you're familiar with the site, with lot 3, we have the fire hall at the sort of top right, we've got the medical center proposal there, and then I've named this site A, which is currently where the sort of commuter, the long-term parking is in that area, and then B is behind the RCMP, and then C is, a lot of people I think don't even know it's there as community land. It goes right onto the trunk road. It's fairly steep. It's forested. It's next to where Stacy Beamer is now, and what was the old gas station. So sort of zooming in on lot, the area A, and again, this is not a site plan. Bob may be shaking his boots because he does wonderful jobs on site plans, and I threw this together. And it's just an idea of how big that footprint might be. And the proposed medical center, which is approximately 8,000, I know they haven't sort of set that either. We could do our building there, we could do it in different areas. There is some topography at the bottom of the site that we'd have to be aware of, but just to show you the idea of a sort of footprint. And it could be a 3 stories isn't quite allowed, but 2.5 stories, like whatever we kind of determine might fit on the site. Some parking, we'd probably be looking for a bit of a relaxation potentially. The idea being that these are affordable units. Hopefully some people, not everybody has a car, they're walking to work, walking to the ferry. So it's just a possibility of what could be developed on that, how we could work in conjunction with the proposed medical center, maybe some shared parking, however that might work, but now's the time that we could all work together to develop that. And to address the parking, because I know that's the number one thing I think people say, is that parking's really heavily used and it's great. So I would hate to take it away and not put anything back. And so where I think there is potential on that area B, and you'll see in the next one when we look at that, is, and of course this would have to be explored for cost, is we could put a bit of a laneway through and the parking along the sort of bottom boundary of that RCMP site there. And why I suggest that, I'm going to flip forward to the next option, is because when we looked at Lot B, that's what we had proposed for the circulation and the parking, and having the buildings on that sort of lower part facing the park. So if we did proceed with the area B, that's how we would do the parking. And I thought, well, if area A is easier to develop, and it makes sense that it's all happening in the same timeline as the proposed medical center and fire hall, so I'm going to flip back to A at the moment, we could actually just rough in that sort of little circulation, rough in the parking, provide similar amounts of parking for commuters, and then build our building in a, an easier to develop ideal site. So again, none of this is set in stone. These are all just sort of ideas and concepts to be explored, but I think there's solutions to be had. So Lot B, or Area B I should say, that I've identified could be just have that simple laneway, some parking roughed in, and we thought it could be a series of smaller buildings, so those would be 4-plexes or 6-plexes, depending on if we wanted to build them in phases, or if it did different construction method, or of course that could be one larger or two larger buildings that was more of an apartment building style to be determined in feasibility. And then C is, to be honest, I almost hesitated showing it, but I just wanted to show it in context. I don't think it's really a preferred option at this stage. I think it's going to be expensive. I think it's right on the main street. I don't think it's the right way to go, but I just wanted to show it. And mainly also because if we look at Alfred, I'm just going to flip back for a moment. Land, and I think a lot of us know on Bowen, a lot of development comes down to like water and sewer, and all the utilities and how do we deal with those. So that's why A, I think, is really ideal, because that's going to be really easy. B and C, I think, need to be thought of almost together, because their sewer either is going to have to be pumped up and into the new line, or go across the street and down into the cove. They're going to have to be thought of. I wouldn't develop one without thinking of the other, as well as vehicle access and everything. So not that it's impossible, but I think they kind of need to be thought of, at least thought of in advance. If you're developing B, think about C and what might happen in the future. So that's again why A kind of seems like a little bit easier. You can leave B and C for later, and A is ready to go now. So timeline and funding. I'm zooming in here. This is in the application as well. So here we are, April 2018. We're presenting to you, and optimistically we'll receive approval in principle from you today, and then over the next month or so we would work together, hopefully with staff. We would review the work that's been done to date by BC Housing. Hopefully that can be made available to us. We'd be going through the CMHC has a seed funding opportunity that would be up to about $20,000. And when I spoke to a woman named Elizabeth LaFrancoise from CMHC, and I explained that we would hopefully be getting this funding, it's a grant, so it's free money, for a feasibility study, she said, oh, we don't usually fund feasibility studies. We'd really prefer to have feasibility first, and then we'd be funding kind of the next phases. And I explained, so that was an email, so I said, phone. I said, are you sure? And what she said is, when I explained everything, she said, wow, you guys are good candidates. And I said, we've got the municipality with land, if they agree. We've already talked to BC Housing, which you guys have kind of done that work. You've set up those lines of communications. The work's already there. They've updated our needs assessment. I said, we've got Marla Zucht, and she literally knows Marla on a first name basis, on our team, on our board, and Tim Wake. And I'm an architect, and I'm experienced in construction projects. And she said, yeah, I think you guys would be you'd be good candidates. Those were her words. You'd be good candidates for the seed funding for a feasibility study. So that's why I'm really enthused. That kind of got me like, yeah, I think we're on the right track. So if we can get, the idea being in about early June, if we can get a letter of intent from the municipality that says, yes, if the feasibility proves out, we will provide you with this land in the form of this long-term lease, and we can take that and do our application for the seed funding. I'm optimistic that we'd be getting that funding. So we'd be getting money from CMHC, doing the feasibility study, seeing how we can make this work. Again, very optimistically, they'll give us some great numbers, some great feedback. We figure out how we can make this happen, or again, if there's a shortfall, how do we meet that? And we move forward. And they also have, and I'm just going to skip ahead, it's the same thing. You'll see June, July, August will come up at the next page. And I'm not sure of the timing on this one, so we'd have to see how long, I don't know how quickly they get back to us, but we would get the seed funding, we'd engage a consultant, they would complete a feasibility project, feasibility study. At that same time, we'd be establishing the stakeholder committee. And then once that's established, they also then have further funding, which is in the form of an interest-free loan. And the purpose of it is to get you started on all of those expensive upfront costs. So hiring the surveyors and the architects and the engineers and all of the money that has to come up front before you can get a shovel in the ground. They provide up to, and I think it's 200, I was a bit confused with the 200, 250, I think the 50 includes a grant. So up to $200,000 of interest-free loan for those beginning stages of construction. And so again, if everything's sort of yes, 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 municipalities on board, feasibility studies a yes, I think we'd also be a very good candidate for that funding. And then what happens, from what Elizabeth told me from CMHC, is then once you actually, construction begins, you get construction financing from a different entity, and that loan gets paid out as part of that construction loan. And there's options for construction loans, BC Housing being one of them, that's low interest rates, but there's also other entities that I've learned about in CASA and Newmarket, and they're actually sort of, well, one of them, I forget saying CASA, is an arm of the is it the Cooperative Federation of BC? And so you can imagine co-ops have a lot of money in the bank, right? Because people buy in and it sits there. So this is the investment arm of that. And so they actually invest in nonprofit housing entities such as ourselves in the form of co-op construction loans at favorable interest rates. It's wonderful. So it's really everybody helping each other, right? Which is what I love about the affordable housing community. So there's lots of options, and even Van City has loans programs for nonprofit entities. So we actually have lots of options in terms of construction financing, and then of course once construction is complete, it converts to a more traditional mortgage, again with possibly some of these lenders or different funds. So I have a very optimistic timeline that would obviously be adjusted as funding came through and feasibility studies came through, but just to sort of give you an idea of where it would go and how it might move. And what have I got next? Okay, so for today, the request is to approve in principle a partnership between the municipality and Birch to utilize a portion of Lot 3 for an affordable housing project, to direct staff to report back to council to determine parameters of the partnership and land allocation, an estimate of staff time required to move the project forward, request staff report back to council at its May 28th meeting, and provide a letter of intent in early June to proceed with the CMHC seed funding application. And why those timelines is CMHC gets their funding in May, June, and it's a first come, first served at this stage. I think they're hoping to move to a slightly different model of more things, but at this stage, that's how it works. So if we can be in June with our application, again, from what I've been told, we're good candidates to get it. So I think that wraps it up. Oh yeah, that was my ask, which I won't reiterate. I just thought I'd put it there in case you guys wanted to look at it and refer to it. But yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Just with a few minutes to spare, so if there are any questions.
Who would like to start? Gary?
Robin, fantastic. Really good presentation, and I think you've covered a lot of areas. I would expect that Birch would manage the project after it.
Yes, sorry if that wasn't clear. The idea is that
Yeah.
we develop it and we manage it.
Okay. Yeah, it's just nice to see somebody come to council with a plan, you know, which is, that's what we've been waiting for. And make no mistake about it, it's gonna be an uphill grind, and the costs these days are so phenomenal.
Yeah.
But I'm certainly willing to think about it, and let's take it forward to the next step and see if it's gonna work or not, because it's a tremendous project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things we're hoping that we can explore is how to be innovative. How can we use different
Yeah.
construction techniques? Is it modular? Is it panelized? Is it,
Yeah.
well, what can we do to try and get this built in an efficient and economic manner?
Well, you know, you see Rondi's already talking about the cost of his escalating, you know, unbelievably, and
Yeah.
that's the reality. That's
Yeah.
today's reality. I don't know how long that will exist, but
Yeah.
power to you.
Okay. I'll go on to Maureen.
Bunch of questions, Robin, and thank you for the presentation. It was very, very good. So the area that you've identified as A
Yep.
in your map, can you bring it up?
Yeah. Do you want the overall like that?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's
1,000 square feet.
38,000 square feet.
Yeah.
So that's about
Just under an acre.
just under an acre.
Yeah.
So I have some questions about how all of those pieces are going to fit together. And those are questions that I need to have answered by our planner before I can approve or support something in principle. So that's a concern for me. The next slide, if you could go to that. What does the 8,000 indicate in
A building footprint.
the building footprint?
Yeah, and again, it's all just approximate at this stage.
Okay, and it's attached, sorry, it's attached residential? Or are
Yes,
those
the idea is,
separate
in
units?
this case, it would be like an apartment building.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you. The needs assessment, you mentioned having access to the BC Housing Needs Assessment that was done. It's actually included in March 1st council agenda.
Oh, great, thank
And
you.
it's very brief. What they did was they conducted an assessment to make a general decision about whether there was need on Bowen Island for additional housing, and they concluded that there was. So you can take a look at that at this point without anybody opening access to information there. If this were to go ahead, what kind of housing agreements are you anticipating?
So do you mean in terms of the housing agreements that you have with other developments that happen on the island? Is that
Yes.
what you mean? I'd be open to whatever it is that council would require. Again, we're a nonprofit, we're not in this to make money, so we're in this to make the project as affordable as possible. And I just want to, I'm anticipating some of the units will have to be in market rents, just knowing construction costs and the feasibility of it. And even I believe BC Housing's formula is a third kind of, so they acknowledge that you have to market. And I think even in their announcement last week of, $1.1 billion over 10 years, they acknowledge that as well, that each project actually has to have a mix. And I think that's still needed on Bowen. I think there's lots of people who can pay market rates, they just want secure homes. So it would be a mix, so I'm happy to discuss whether we stick with that third, or whether we say, I'm certainly aiming for more than the 15%. That is generally the policy. I prefer to aim for at least a third, if not half. But again, that's where the feasibility comes in. I can't speculate at this
So
stage.
in discussion with BC Housing, the two sites that they have looked at are in fact on lot 3 and on lot 2.
Mhm.
So this is not going to come as a surprise
Okay.
to them.
To them, yeah.
I'm not clear, you've talked about your board and you've talked about the team.
Mhm.
What's the relationship between the two?
So thank you for asking that. The difference being the board on Birch is much more, they're like an advisory board, so they're giving advice. They're especially like Marla and Tim, who've been through lots of this before, they're giving advice. We've had a couple of AGMs, but essentially they haven't been working directly on the project. It's been because really it started with Daniel, and he invited me on, so I was the representative of Birch and Bob, so the three of us kind of have brought this project along. So they're involved too in that they are the board of Birch, although I'm the representative, I'm on the project team. They're certainly going to be advising us. Yeah, they're not directly related, like working on the project itself. Like they're not at the project meetings and
Can
stuff.
I add a follow-up question to that one?
Let's let Maureen finish for a second.
Well, okay, can I ask a follow-up just to that one?
Sure.
What's their decision-making capacity? You're the project team, the board is going to have to say yay or nay and make the decisions to go.
Yes, I guess they will ultimately, because that's their capacity as a board. Although I believe at this stage, from everything I've heard from you, they're very supportive of what I'm doing, because they know that I'm taking the charge and I'm the one putting the work in. So at this stage, they're very supportive. So I'd be very surprised if we hit any roadblocks through them. But yeah, of course, they're the responsible parties for the nonprofit organization.
I'd like to see something in writing that articulates that relationship. It
Okay.
would give me some comfort. The asking for land at a nominal cost. So this is leased land. This is not given land. Is that your?
Yeah, so that was on the advice of Kathy Lalonde, so we met with her a couple of times. And my first preference, of course, would be if you could just give us the land. That would be wonderful for us as an organization to have the asset, all those things. So if that's on the table, I'd be happy to discuss it. But on Kathy's advice, sorry, that's my timer. On Kathy's advice, she suggested going the lease route. And I think that's because of what the medical centers proposed. And from the other side of the table, if I was in your shoes, I think that's what I'd be wanting as well. So the municipality keeps the land, it's still an asset for them, but for a extended amount of time, you're saying, yes, we can use it for our affordable housing project.
You said that you thought that rezoning would not be required. I need to hear from planning about whether that in fact is the case.
I mean, it's in the village commercial zone. It allows dwelling as a principal use. It allows quite dense development in terms of lot coverage and FSR. There's no unit restriction in that zone. And it has, I think, a 9-meter height limit. So in broad strokes, what I've seen seems compatible. Whether or not the actual design needs tweaking, you know.
Okay, that's great, thank you. You mentioned the Tofino grant, the rural dividend funds that they received. We have been banging on the rural dividend door for some time, and there is, as I think you probably know, there's a rethinking of all of the funding for rural areas within the province because it's not working very well, and Bowen tends to fall between the cracks. And just a point of information, the mayor of Tofino is coming to Bowen Island at the end of July, and she'll be talking about the housing authority in Tofino and also about their short-term rental regulation. Is that everything I have? That's everything for now, but really thank you very much for bringing this forward.
Okay, I'll go to Michael.
Robin, congratulations, that was a great presentation. One of the things that was singularly impressive, and I'm slightly following up on Councillor Nicholson's point, is your board and your team. To enter into an agreement, that's, I mean, yes. One thing we'd like to see maybe it actually tightened up a little bit if you're going to have a board. That's, you talked about some changes, so obviously this is a situation where I think it would be greatly to your advantage to have those loose ends tied up. And I would also appreciate a commitment from those people who are accepting a board responsibility that they are going to stay on that board to the completion of this project. We all know from the past there is nothing more time-wasting or difficult than a constantly changing board. So I wish you the very best in finding the right people and getting their commitment that they are going to see this project through from beginning to end. Because we don't want to waltz with an octopus here. So good luck.
Sue Ellen?
Just a couple of things. Thank you for the excellent presentation and everybody coming to show your support. It's wonderful. It makes me a tiny bit uneasy, though, that at this meeting we're looking at perhaps being asked for approval in concept and or in principle, because it just feels so great. And yet I know there's questions outstanding, and so before I want to do that, I would prefer to vote about the in principle side at a future meeting, like we used to do. I don't know if we've got a written policy about that, but it used to be that we would, when there was a delegation, we wouldn't vote on it at that meeting, just so we had the chance for the sober second thought to get the questions answered, and we didn't get carried away with the tide of enthusiasm from a super presentation and a whole bunch of very interested people with a crisis knocking at the door, in the house. So I appreciate your presentation. I just have a couple of questions too. Who was the lady who said that you were good candidates that you talked to at the CMHC?
Her name is Elizabeth Lefrancoise, and I can pass on her contact details.
Okay, that would be great.
She's our, they have affordable housing consultants that I guess they employ, and she's our regional person of contact.
Because Elizabeth LaFontaine, because if you could pass on that info, then that allows staff to be able to check in with her.
Yeah.
And just to sort of make sure all the ducks are in the row that, okay. And I'm delighted to hear you talking about all the different kinds of funding that you see there in the look that you've taken, your group has taken in it. And I would, regarding the leasing, personally I've heard of more organizations lately that are using the community land trust model. So I would certainly be open to that being explored as well. Or leasing, because the challenge is to keep it affordable overall the years to come. It's almost, this idea of in perpetuity is a challenge for a board, even for a municipality, and to keep it affordable into the future, where many, for example, in Europe, even co-ops, and all the housing is gone to second homes. Anyway, what used to be good low-cost rental housing is gone. And just something in writing about Birch managing the project later. Just the idea of who would the municipality be working with through time, what's envisioned for that. I would like to see that fleshed out a little bit. And as well, the mix with market housing, because I was busy writing down rental. And then just what that 30-30-30 might look like, partly so it's clear to everybody that what those units might actually look like. So those would be my requests. That's a bunch of them, I realize, but I still have questions, and however, I really appreciate you coming forward. It's a need.
Okay, I'm going to jump in. So basically, you're talking a $4 to $5 million project here. Now,
Construction costs, yes.
Yeah, and we're working with BC Housing now on a very similar project. BC Housing is very supportive, and they have all the financing arrangements and all that sort of stuff. They're saying that to make the numbers work, we need $1 million from the province, and that when the $1 million from the province comes along, we're kind of off and running. On the other side of that, we're grappling with how do we physically run it, right? How much level does the municipality have? Do you want a nonprofit society actually doing the management and so on? So I guess my question is, how do you get over that $1 million, right? Because we know with free land, low financing, etc., these are the numbers type of thing, and then you hit that shortfall. And once we fulfill the shortfall of funding, we're basically off and running. And as far as the formula going into the future, you have a fixed mortgage amount, you know what I mean? And you know what your rents have to cover. And then you do the lowest rents that you can in the project to cover that as the years go forward. It's basically a 60-year model with a 30-year mortgage for rental units, because at the end of 60 years, the whole thing pretty much needs to be redeveloped. You've reached the end of the life. After the 30-year mortgage is paid off, you're in a position to start accumulating capital to work towards the renewal. So these are sort of the typical models that are used other places and what we would be looking at following. And just before I let you answer that, the other thing is the location. We have found that over the 2.5 years that we've been working with BC Housing, the land allocations that we were looking at then have changed over time. The community lands, there are people who make the case that it should be for community services, that we shouldn't be going out and buying land to put in our skating rink or whatever. We should be looking at the land that the community as a whole uses for that as our highest priority. So as those needs, like a fire hall, come up over time, we may be looking at different locations for housing. And certainly the area next to the school fence up the hill, now that we've put that sewer line along Seniors Lane, has become a much more feasible thing. So I'm wondering how locked in you are to a specific location, given the timeframes that we may be looking at before if someone actually breaks ground. Does it matter? Isn't it really a matter of funding feasibility as being the primary first step?
Yeah, well, so there's a few things in there. I'll address this last one first. We looked at Lot 2 as well, like that was one of the bits that was identified. And certainly Lot 3 compared to Lot 2 is a lot easier and faster to build, right? It's relatively flat, it's got access. The biggest challenge I see with Lot 2, which the area that I believe has been identified for the BC Housing Project, is I think like car access. And I think I would prefer to see that lot developed once the community center is either built or well underway, to understand how you're going to access that site. Because when you look at the maps, there certainly is a little, buildable ledge, but I can't easily see how you would access it by vehicles, and we'd have to have some kind of parking and that, whereas this one on lot 3 is a lot easier and more straightforward in terms of those accesses. But some of your other questions that were in there, from my understanding with BC Housing, and I mean, you've done a great job getting to this point with them, and I completely appreciate that there probably is a funding shortfall. And that's why I keep referring to, we have to get a feasibility study, because I haven't done the map, and you guys they've already done one for you. So that's why I don't know what the mix of units and the costs and all those kinds of things are yet. And I don't know what the funding shortfall, and it may very well be what they've proposed is $1 million. And that's what we have to look for in terms of outside funding. But what I find is, and I think it's a similar track that you're on with the community center, is you kind of have to start the work down certain stages to get there. So you have to do the work of figuring out what are you going to build, what are we going to propose, and then the funding becomes available, like because you're ready to apply for it. Whereas if you're kind of at this stage, well, we have a site and we have an idea, I find they're not as ready to do that. Whereas when you're kind of shovel ready, or at least close to shovel ready, is when they want to start giving out funding, and they want it to go into something that's going to get built pretty quickly. So that's my experience in terms of the funding that can happen, and it may very well be that we have to wait. So on my very optimistic timeline may be stretched out because we simply have to wait for that infusion of funding. But from what I understand of the model that BC Housing uses is that there has to be a nonprofit partner of some kind. So to develop it and manage it and maintain it. So the option is either to partner with somebody like us, or to develop your own housing authority, which I think is also, not out of the question. It's something that might be happening. So I do see that as probably because I think you're a ways off from that, and it could happen quickly, who knows. But I also don't think saying yes to us doesn't preclude that from happening. As the Tofino model shows, we can all work together on it. It doesn't mean you have to do one or the other. It's just, more people, more ideas, more energy and effort going into solving the problem. So I don't think saying yes to us precludes any of that. I don't think saying yes to us necessarily precludes the project that you're talking about with BC Housing. Maybe this becomes the project with BC Housing, maybe it's a separate one. I'm very open to whatever those opportunities might be. I'm not necessarily locked into this site. Like if all signs and point lead to that lot 2 that BC Housing's been looking at, and everybody's on the same page, and BC Housing says, no, that's the site, okay, let's do it. Like I'm not gonna say, dig my heels in, I just want something to happen. So our preference is for this site. We think it's the best lot. We think it's going to be the easiest and fastest to develop. But if the feedback is that no, it really is better somewhere else, then okay, let's do it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, those are
The 20K from CMHC for the feasibility, what will you know at the end of the feasibility study if you're funded?
I think hopefully the numbers that the mayor's just outlined, which is, okay, we're going for 20 units or 24 units, we're going to have this many units at this much rent, this many are affordable, this many are market, this is the, it's kind of that whole, the dollars and cents of it, and what's the shortfall, and what funding do we need.
My concern is that work has already been done by BC Housing.
Yeah.
So the sense of urgency to get to CMHC in order to do the feasibility study is, in some respects, redundant.
Yeah.
So if they've already done it, which all I knew is they've done the needs assessment. And
they've done pro formas.
Yeah, okay.
As well.
So then if they've already done that work, and we do want to work with them on the work that they've already done, so we don't create a second project. We jump in and we say, hey, let's keep working on this project together. Then I think that's makes us even better candidates for that funding. And then it means we can use that funding for other stuff. We can use it to take the project forward into the next step. So if we say, yep, it's that lot, and it's that, this is the project, and we already have the pro forma done, we can go into those next stages of the project and use that grant funding for it.
We had our BC Housing contact confirmed to come to Bowen at the beginning of May for an event, and the event has moved in a somewhat different direction, so I've sent an email to him and had some, our EDC government liaison connect with BC Housing. She hasn't connected specifically with James, but she's spoken with BC Housing. And what I'm pursuing at this point is bringing him over to the island to look at the potential sites and have further conversation, and to do that in later May or in June if he's going to be part of the community engagement event. So our current BC Housing contact has not been on the island. The two prior ones who were senior to it have been on the island, have seen the site, have had the conversations regarding, you know, the funding, the partnerships that have to be part of this. And having James here and having a conversation with council involving Robin, I think would be helpful in moving to a next step. But it's a little ways away because, as the mayor said, he's still on vacation, he's coming back soon.
Yes.
Well, so that, couple of questions. If he was confirmed to come in early May, why can't we just carry on with that, or replace it with the meeting you're talking about?
The early May was for a weekend speaker event, so we are changing the nature of the visit. We can certainly give him that option. It'll be a Saturday morning.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I think the proper process would be to refer this to staff and ask them for a report and to come back to the May council meeting to sort of agree in principle that we should continue to work with Birch about this project. Quite happy with the lease situation. The land's always owned by the municipality, and we can put conditions in the lease that, you know, the lease ends if things goes, you know, they try to change the uses of the units to, you know, different than we've agreed on up front. So I don't think we need to bother with another structure called a land trust or even a housing board. We can deal with all of that in the lease and keep it small and simple. I just was I recall a motion that we passed to authorize Daniel to go and have some conversations with BC Housing way back. Now, did he go and have any of those conversations?
I think there was an email exchange.
Yes, I had 2 or 3 conversations with him on the phone and an email. And really the conclusion I drew from the conversation is we were not at a stage where it was worth BC Housing investing time in a second proposal from Bowen Island. They did not know who from Bowen is speaking to them.
Okay.
So, and it's their year end, it was time just to step back until we had something more formal working together.
So that's part of my issue with this whole process, and I really don't understand all the conversations that have been going on with BC Housing and feasibility studies on costs. You need to sort of know what your site looks like before you have an idea of what your construction costs are going to be. So I'm not sure that BC Housing has done any more than a really high level, you know, if it's a flat piece of land, we can do it for this. So I really would like to know more about it and have this meeting with James, and so that we can all understand what's in the loop, because we really haven't seen anything in writing from them. I don't know whether we have anything. The only thing we've seen is that the assessment information. So I would really think we all need to be up to speed, including planning staff, for the conversations with BC Housing. So I would like to make a motion that we refer this to staff for a report back to council, and that we try and organize a meeting with all of council and BC Housing, and as soon as possible, and that we consider including Robin in part of that meeting.
I like that. I'll second that.
Did I say it slow enough, Tyler? Because I'm not sure that I can remember what I
Jumped in
said.
there.
Yeah, just while you're doing that, Tyler, let me speak to that for a second. As I said before, I think our main thing is next steps, right? And we are grappling with who's going to actually run this going into the future. How are we going to look at some owner-occupied units as part of our affordable housing strategy, well beyond rental units, et cetera?
She didn't say anything about owner.
No, I'm saying now that as some of the stuff that we've been looking at internally. And so again, it all gets down to what kind of an organization actually runs this. And I think the work that you've done to date demonstrates that we might be on the right track here. So certainly including you in our conversations with BC Housing, I think is a good positive step forward, and you can be far better informed then, as hopefully we will be, as to what is actually happening. Anyway, we'll just let Tyler come
Well, if I can just answer, I'm really pleased to hear that, because that's really is my main goal coming in today, is let's be partners. Like, let's work together on this, as opposed to us coming from here and you going from there, exactly as you said. Let's all have the same conversations together and see how we can move this forward.
We really don't have the resolution here, so Allison, can you give it again?
Can you read what you've typed so far, Tyler?
Council directs staff to review the Birch report, report back to council, and there was an invitation for Robin.
Oh, okay, that council request staff to review or direct staff, okay. I think you got the first part right.
Refer the, yeah.
Or council refer the Birch report to staff and ask for, and request that they report back to council with respect to the report, or next steps. And then the second part was that we proceed as soon as possible to have a meeting with all of council and BC Housing.
That's it.
And consider including Robin Fenton in part of that meeting. And I think that's it. That was it.
Okay, I've got that. Thank you.
Can I try a friendly amendment there rather than considering Robin Fenton?
That's it.
To invite Robin to be part of that meeting?
Well, I guess what I used the word consider, not because I didn't want to invite her, but the fellow from BC Housing may say he wanted her. Yeah, so that's why I said. So you can say include if possible, rather than, yeah.
There's no agent in the second part here, so are we directing staff to coordinate a meeting with BC Housing?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I think the original motion had the words continue to in it somewhere.
Yeah, because Maureen had said she'd already,
The contact was established somehow.
What do you say about it? Is this the sort of resolution you like?
That works, yes.
Okay.
Well, certainly.
Okay, you want to read it back to us, Tyler?
The council directs staff to review the Birch report and report back to council, and that staff proceed as soon as possible with council and BC Housing and include Robin Fenton as part of that meeting.
I think you need to proceed as soon as possible with organizing a meeting.
With organizing a meeting.
Proceed with organizing a meeting as soon as possible.
With all of council and BC Hydro.
Yeah, BC Housing.
Sorry.
BCH has two.
Had a bit of power.
And
That council organize,
That
council
staff organize a meeting between council.
as soon as possible with council, BC Housing, and include Robin Fenton.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, I'll go back to the audio record if there's little words. That's the intent.
Just a small amendment, make perhaps Robin Fenton representing Birch in there.
Oh, that's a good idea.
just for clarity, years from now.
Very nice.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but I think you did say report back at the May meeting, and I don't know if that's in there, just,
Oh, yeah, that
Timeline,
report
yes.
was report back. So it's not something that's huge. Next, just a quick and dirty next step.
Very good.
Okay. Moved, seconded. Any discussion before I call the question? All in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you very much.
Do you want to give him time to clear out first? Do you want to give him time to clear out? or-
Well, I'll announce the next item on the agenda. That'll
Just give him
be
some
moving
time.
on. We're going to have the manager of planning and development talking about land use amendment 335.
Where are we here?
Thanks, Robin.
Oh, sorry.
Robin went on way down the next page, so.
Have about a 20-minute
Can we just take a 60 second break?
I keep on listening. Sure. Just take a 2-minute break.
Hi, Alex. Sue Ellen here.
Charlotte, I don't good. They gave her another shot. So sometimes now things like Apple that they use, they're supposed to get your pertussis.
Included the purchase. But then yeah, it's just used so you can walk there.
Did we take an official recess or?
I just said we take 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Reminding that everyone gets back after our
big thing is-
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
Because she said, I thought we were kind of little.
Well, I said, yeah, carry on. No, of course. It's gonna come down to it. I got carried away talking to somebody else. No, I didn't. You guys will carry on.
We don't mind. We're just making land.
Really good, how are you doing? Yeah. What's happening? I missed your little presentation the other day. Down at the club.
I like Gulfport. No, of course.
So once we then.
Just get.
I don't think I ever, like, they gave me antibiotics, I don't think I ever had, I think just the doctor was like, no, take these over, back to the clinic. Don't see me until you finish them. But I still just have like cough and cold.
So,
6.3.
Oh, yeah?
okay. And we thought that they would,
Not just figuring out the next 10-year plan.
We had thought about them being our operator for a while.
Who's that?
Metro.
Oh, yeah.
We need those too.
Those are projects that have been in the works for much longer than it's been.
Is this for me? Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't see new things for developments, I might come by later in the day and borrow your staff. implementation now, there's a need to keep it on because there's areas.
I was trying to get like it's like you have to enter your data.
So I was working for 2 hours this morning.
Okay, we're off and running again. Okay, next up. Daniel, you're the man. We are back in session.
So thank you, Mayor and Council. So I'm here today to talk about bylaw 445. So it's an amendment to the WG1B zone. So that's the water zone off the coast of Bowen. So it's shown here the zone boundaries for this zone variation, WG1B. In the report for the third reading are the comments that we received, so from the 2 public hearings we had. And I haven't summarized them in this report, or in this presentation, but what I just wanted to go through really quickly was just some of the points for staff discussion that were included. So some of the comments that were raised at the public hearing and that staff wanted to take a minute just for clarity. So one of the things that we got lots of comments from was that the bylaws as they are, or the bylaw as it's drafted, what it would do, it would prohibit moorage other than moorage that is necessary or incidental to a navigational purpose or to deal with a life safety incident or other emergency situation. So one of the things we got comments from and staff wanted to make sure to clarify is that moorage incidental to a navigational purpose would include anchoring in the area or tying to a mooring buoy as part of a boat journey. So it's not, your boat isn't living there, but if you're traveling and you're staying overnight at CRC or during the day, if you're traveling on to another destination or you're traveling there and traveling back to sort of where the boat is permanently moored, that would be included as an incidental to navigational purpose and something that is constitutionally protected. So it's not to say that if somebody anchors there, that doesn't mean they're in violation of the bylaw. That's an incidental to navigational purpose of the bylaw. Similarly, we got questions about mooring buoys. So mooring buoys are federally regulated in the Constitution. So municipalities can't restrict the structure of a mooring buoy. So what bylaw 445 does, it regulates uses within the zone. So it's not the structure of a mooring buoy, but it's the use of the permanent moorage that is prohibited. So as we said, if somebody gets appropriate, follows the Transport Canada regulations for mooring buoys, take down the mooring buoy, and we would say, well, you can use it as incidental to navigational purpose. So as we said, is that part of the journey, but not as a permanent moorage, not the permanent moorage use. We got questions about non-conforming uses. So for the existing docks that were lawfully built at the time when they were built, then they fall under this Section 520 of the Local Government Act. So that's the provincial act that municipalities follow, and it protects non-conforming uses. So it says if at the time a land use regulation bylaw is adopted, the building or structure is lawfully used, but now the use does not conform to the bylaw, the use may be continued as a non-conforming use. So the existing docks were lawfully constructed, and so the uses to which they are put can continue. The Local Government Act, subsequent in their non-conforming use section, lays out 2 ways that a non-conforming use can end. So it says either if the use is discontinued for a continuous period of 6 months, or if the structure is damaged or destroyed to the extent that 75% or more of its value above its foundation is destroyed, then any subsequent use of the land is subject to the land use regulation bylaw. So that's the provincial act on it, and that's how the non-conforming uses. So the passing of this bylaw wouldn't alter non-conforming uses for uses that were lawful at the time that they were constructed. Finally, some comments in the public hearing about discriminatory zoning. And so highlighting zoning bylaws are, in their very nature, discriminatory in that they permit uses in some zones and not in others. So where we are, we're allowed to have a municipal hall in this zone. We're not allowed down the hill, we're not allowed to build a municipal hall. So it can be based on any number of reasons. So geographical, geological reasons, environmental considerations, transportation. So you see a lot of construction on Bowen is sort of historic transportation reasons. historic settlement patterns, even community visions. So communities may have visions for one area that's different than another area, and council, as long as they're following the correct procedure, that's something that is within council's power. So highlighting here, council's previously determined that WG1B is a distinct area, so that's why it's a zone variation within the greater WG1 zone. And so the proposed bylaw isn't amending those boundaries, but it's clarifying the prohibited uses within that zone. And that was the end of my presentation. So looking for questions or council's consideration of the recommendation.
Okay, go to Gary.
Yeah, we're back in the same position we were in before. We had a long discussion about this and we thought we had some remedy to it. I don't see that remedy. I don't see the remedy to the public and the owners of those properties. They want to know that if they come to their dock and drop some stuff off, they can take their boat out and they can put it on a mooring buoy. And they can put it on there for a week, they can put it on for 2 weeks. They can put it on overnight. This, there's specifics in here about overnight. Is there a time limit on this? Why do we have all this legalese in here when all we really want to know, and the owners want to know, is can they use those mooring buoys to put their boats on? And this other thing about incidental to a navigational purpose. Why can't we just put it in plain language? Can they use those mooring buoys or can they not? For at their discretion, but not liveaboard, obviously.
So I guess, first of all, I don't think there's not currently any mooring buoys.
No, there isn't. But they can put those in. That's a totally different operation. They can put those in. That's federally regulated. That's not what we're talking about today. The use of those mooring buoys is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And unless there's some clarity in there, this problem is not going to go away. It's going to be contested. So unless we can guarantee those owners that they can use those mooring buoys, which they can federally put in there, we've got a problem.
So I think, in terms of the discussion, it's, when does something become, it's not incidental to navigational purpose, or when does it, become it? And I think that's sort of a case-by-case thing. There's not a time, we're not saying, well, gee, you've been there 30 days, it's not incidental, or you've been there 15 days or something. I don't think there's a line that we're pointing to. What we're saying is if it's part of a journey, you've come out, you're staying for a week, your boat's staying there for a week as you're journeying to your property and coming back, I would say that's okay.
But it becomes totally subjective.
Okay.
That's the argument I have, and we're not going to get it solved.
I think the points have been made on both sides. Let me jump in for a second. This stems from a court ruling, okay? So what happened was that as part of our bylaw, we said you can moor at a mooring buoy, or you can moor as a temporary use. A defined use at a mooring buoy was permitted under our bylaw, okay? And so the other side in the case said, well, that's allowed under federal navigation law. So since you've included it in your bylaw, you must have some place that you're letting people moor to, right? There must be some place that you can moor your buoy, because you specifically put in your bylaw that you can moor, right? So you've allowed the usage now. Where can people moor to, right? So it's a catch-22. It goes either direction, but our intent is not to enforce anything to do with mooring buoys, because that is a federal statute. At Mannion Bay, we got our license of occupancy to give us the power to regulate, and this was that Kelowna case and so on, right? So we had to go through that years of procedure to get the ability to take people off those buoys in the wintertime if there's a problem with them. There's no intent in our bylaw. Our bylaw was done and finished, and if it hadn't been for the legal case and the difference between structure and use and the arguments made, this never would have happened. So as a policy, I think, Daniel, we discussed at some meeting the potential of having a policy statement that it was not the intent of the municipality to regulate moorage on buoys under this dock bylaw. Did you follow up on that?
I mean, I think that, yeah, I don't know if we just, yeah, policy statement or something for council to say that that's not the intent of the,
Right.
yeah.
And that, so that is the, I mean, that is our intent. We have no intent to send bylaw officers out there to sell something they can't wear at a mooring buoy when it's federal jurisdiction.
It's not.
So I'll go to Sue Ellen and Maureen.
Okay, I'm going to speak in support of this motion because I think it does clarify prohibited uses. That was the question, even though the bylaw before said no permanent moorage, there was still a question. And the question of that boat lift was the one that we, Zonchen Envirotech Corporation Limited, won the appeal. And so I'm in favor of tightening it up so that the will of council is clear. So I will be voting in favor of this motion.
Do you wish to speak to it, Maureen?
Just to say that I will also be voting in support of the motion, and to thank Daniel for going through the concerns that were expressed at the public meeting and addressing them. I think you did a good job doing that, and I appreciate the work.
Allison?
I'm going to be voting against this. I'm, again, echoing a lot of what Councillor Ander has said. And I would like to see a written policy that says we have no intention of enforcing any bylaws with respect to the use of those mooring buoys if they're being used by the upland property owner or their friends. End of story.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be.
I preferred to have the no permanent moorage in that was in there before, and none of the references to incidental to navigation.
Okay. Could we go to Michael?
Yeah, that was an undertaking given. Not blaming you, Daniel, I think you've done stellar work on this.
Right.
That was an undertaking given, and that undertaking hasn't been met.
Where was it?
We agreed at council that it would be provided, this statement would be provided.
Policy statement.
And this policy statement has not been provided.
So I think, I mean, I apologize if there's any confusion. I think what I had taken from that and what other staff sort of reviewed the report was that clarity on what moorage is permitted. So in the current bylaw that's in effect, right, is essentially the negative. It says you can't do permanent moorage. This is trying to then clarify what are things that are permitted. So in terms of it allows the incidental, it allows the navigational purpose, the emergency stuff, and then take it from that, clarifying what, you know, what type of things would be permitted under that category.
I understand what Daniel has said, but nevertheless, it doesn't actually satisfy the agreement that we had as a council around this table. You see, the whole discussion, and one of the reasons it's been so strenuously opposed by the three of us, is there is nothing more tedious and badly written, confusing, either legislation or bylaws. 7 good people around this table, plus others, worked diligently and with a very good spirit to try and understand the intricacies and the meaning of some of this terminology. Now, we are still stuck with the intricacies and the meaning of this terminology, which will be a millstone around this bylaw amendment for the rest of its wretched life. Heaven forbid it should ever get passed. So, with this misunderstanding, we open ourselves up to yet further arguments, and those arguments might well or have the potential of taking us back into court. So, of course, some of us are saying, wait a second, we need to go back to the original objectives, tightening up to Councillor Fass's point, that this hole which allowed this last dock to be built. I think we all understand that. But we have spent hours, all of us around this table, just trying to get to really understand. And we've been told for a fact that the intricacies surrounding this legislation are many and various and extremely complicated. So what we asked for, if this thing actually does drag its way through 4th reading, and I appreciate the fact that this was 4th reading, and I thank the fact that this 4th reading was not put on this agenda, is yet again more indecision and just more vagueness. I don't think we're necessarily speaking to a large extent at cross purposes here. I think there is probably more we agree on than disagree on. What some of us fundamentally disagree is this convoluted and unnecessarily complicated bylaw, which will just stack on more levels of confusion. And at risk, and I'm sorry Daniel, I'm not trying to put you in a difficult space of being pedantic. We did agree on this statement, and this statement hasn't been forthcoming. And I'm sorry, it's something that's needed, and where that leaves us today, I'm not sure. I can't possibly speak to anything which just further adds to the workload, not only of councillor and mayor, but also to the team working at the municipality. This is a badly constructed bylaw, and we need to go back to basics and get it right, because this will just haunt us for time to come, and I'd like to see that avoided. This is a bad bylaw.
I'm going to go to Maureen.
I don't agree that it's a badly written bylaw, and my recollection of the discussion that we had was that the bylaw would proceed and be accompanied by a written plain language document that would be prepared prior to final adoption of the bylaw. Given that that was the discussion that we had, I have no problem supporting third reading of this bylaw with the expectation that a more plain language policy statement will be forthcoming.
Okay. Gary, I'm going to cut you off for a second,
That's
just
all right.
in hopes of not going in a circle on this. So normally we would give third and fourth reading today. We cannot discuss with the public after the public hearing anything to do with the bylaw until the bylaw is adopted at third reading. However, fourth reading is the proclamation. By giving it third reading today, we do allow interaction with the public, and the intent here would be that a policy statement that we come up with between this third reading and the adoption will be something that is satisfactory to our legal counsel and satisfactory to the people on the docks. Because basically, as you say, we're talking in a vacuum until we give it third reading. But it is a policy statement. We're saying that it is not our intent to do boys, and it's a matter of how do you do that, and that's a discussion that we can have, not necessarily today. I'm going to go to Allison and then Sue Ellen.
From a process perspective, I believe until fourth reading is given, members of council cannot engage with the public. However, staff can certainly engage with the public. When staff can certainly engage with our legal counsel and can certainly develop a policy to formalize the intent, which I'm understanding you to indicate that the policy would say that Bowen Island Municipality has no intention of enforcing bylaws respecting the use of mooring buoys by the upland property owners and their visitors there too. So if that is the intent and we're going to have that as a written policy, I'm still not going to vote again for this bylaw, but I would like to see that written policy in writing.
Yes.
Before fourth reading.
Yes.
Two things. One, I've been looking in our minutes and I can't find that statement about this policy, so I would like to see that at some point. But other than that, I'd just like to move the recommendation here that bylaw 445, 2017, cited as Bowen Island Municipality Land Use Bylaw number 57, 2002, amendment bylaw 445, 2017, be read a third time.
Okay, and do I have a seconder on that?
Second.
Okay, and discussion before I call the question. Melanie?
So it's a question for staff. Do you need a resolution in regards to drafting up the policy statement, or?
That would be your call.
I don't think we do.
Okay.
No.
Apparently it's on record somewhere already.
Yes.
We just
Yes,
don't have
we
it in
have.
front of us.
Okay,
And-
I just
and-
wanted to make sure that that is,
Right.
is clear that that is.
Yes, that is the intent, between third reading and proclamation and fourth reading. So the bylaw does not come into force until after this has been dealt with. However, having given third reading to the bylaw, we can now engage in discussion.
Staff can.
My understanding is that we are able to hear from the public. We are not able to hear from the public until we receive make third reading. Now, that's coming from, that was my understanding from Kathy, and that's what I'm basically parroting back to everybody.
No, I understand. So therefore, for clarity then, we now have a bylaw which says basically there's not going to be any owner restriction on their buoys in federally regulated waters, right? That's what I'm clearly understanding. I'm secondly clearly understanding that the existing docks are grandfathered and that they are protected under the provisions in which they were legally built.
Yes,
As
that's my
presented by
understanding.
Daniel.
I could ask very simplistically then, other than trying to put the finger in the dike for the one application that made it through appeal. What's this bylaw all about? And that's what I think a lot of people are going to just absolutely just look at us and raise their eyes and say, boy, that was a lot of discussion for telling people what they thought they could do anyway. So I rest my case on badly written bylaws or unnecessarily written bylaws.
Okay, I think we've been here before. Can I call the question, please? All those in favor of third reading? Those opposed? Okay, and those to be noted, thank you. Okay, so Daniel, you're up again. Now we have Trunk Road.
Yeah.
So thank you. So I've, yeah. But, 431 Bowen Island Trunk Road has a rezoning application in RZ 02-2017. Reminder, this is the Union Steamship Marina located right by the BC Ferry Terminal in Snug Cove Harbor. And we're talking about the WC1A zone, so another water zone, but a different water zone. So this is quite a lengthy and sort of complicated zone, but in terms of distilling it, it allows marina and public wharf as principal uses. It allows float house, liveaboard, accessory uses. It limits float house use to 2% of marine berths, subject to permanent connection to sewer pump-out facilities for land-based sewage disposal. Float houses are regulated. It limits their floor area. It limits their height. So float house we define in our land use bylaw. It's a building containing a dwelling unit designed to float on water, but not intended or suitable for navigation. There's currently 150 marina berths at the Union Steamship, and so in our land use bylaw, they allow up to 3 float houses, each with a single dwelling unit in them. So the application is to amend the zone to permit up to 6 floating buildings to house staff workers. The buildings would have a footprint of approximately 55 square meters each. And they would have 2 dwelling units for each building. So it's sort of a different building than is intended as the float house thing. So what the applicant's proposing is doing these float houses along where currently there's sort of a dinghy dock. So as you go down the ramp onto the marina docks, it's immediately on your left. So it's this area right in here, immediately next to the riprap wall. So this came to council I believe September 2017, and so it was referred to the APC and the EDC. So the APC said they support the proposed amendment to allow up to 6 floating buildings containing up to 12 units, and that they recommend the housing be regulated by a housing agreement that specifies the units are primarily staff housing and precludes use as a short-term vacation rentals. The EDC considered it at October 13th, 2017 meeting. They provided comments to staff, so their comments were that tenants be employees of the latest businesses, rental rates be affordable, and that there be a possible mix of free market and restricted rental, that conversion to commercial in the future be prohibited, and that local builders are hired to build it where possible. So you have in your council agenda a proposed bylaw to amend the land use bylaw. And so what that would do would be create a new definition, so float duplex, so something that allows up to 2 dwelling units in a building, so different than a float house. And it would just put a maximum of 6 of these buildings in the zone and a maximum of 12 units in the zone. So rather than doing that sort of percentage of berths, which I agree is kind of confusing and always leads to a back and forth in terms of you need to figure out how many berths there are total to see how many you're allowed. We should just say straight out, okay, you've got 6 of them. But the same height and area restrictions are the same as the existing float houses. So a couple discussion points. So both the APC and the EDC recommended things that typically you'd regulate in a housing agreement. So housing agreements, a special section of the Local Government Act, you can restrict things like who's allowed to rent units, what you're allowed to do with them, how much you're allowed to rent them for, and everything like that. The applicant said they're not willing to enter into a housing agreement. So what the draft bylaw does is it allows commercial guest accommodation in the winter months, but not in the summer months. So that's, as the applicant has said, they want to rent them primarily staff housing in the summer, but the potential to have overnight accommodation through the winter. The land use bylaw. So the land use bylaw can't regulate rental rates or the class of persons able to rent, so just saying it has to be for workers on loan or anything like that. And as I say, I currently drafted it to allow commercial guest accommodation in the winter. But so other changes would require a housing agreement to go on it. Sewer treatments, the applicant has proposed that the buildings have an onboard sewer treatment. He's provided sort of background information on that. The BC Float Home Standard is the provincial standard issued in 2003, and it's actually referred to in our OCP as well for a standard. So it says, float homes shall have or be connected to an approved sewage disposal system. Sewage disposal system shall comply with the sewage system regulation of the municipal wastewater regulation. So what I've drafted in the bylaw is language that they either be connected to an onshore system or that they meet approved system. So looking for compliance with one of those 2 systems. So recommendation, so to grant first reading and to refer it to the APC, the EDC, the Islands Trust, and Vancouver Coastal Health, and similar to other rezoning, instruct the applicant to hold an open house on the application. Okay, that's it.
I'll start this, I'll go around this way. Melanie, did you want to start off? I'm just going to run around the table.
Yeah, that would be great. I just have 2 questions. Have we defined what the winter months are?
I believe in the
October to April, I think.
October through March or November through March?
Yeah, so it said winter, October, November, December, January, February, March.
And then I just had...
Just wanted to ask, is there an on-table to be handed out?
There is an on-table that's what Wandy had spoken to, and I sent it to Tyler at the last minute, so I know it's this one, 6.2H. Should be the bottom of your...
Just take one across it, okay.
Oh, and the other on-table is to relate to the Salal Road rezoning.
Oh.
Yeah.
Never mind.
I made a note of that.
Here,
Oh,
pass
okay,
it
so
back
that's
for now.
not,
Yeah.
so we already have it?
6.2H is from the applicant, and so...
Oh, yeah, so we have that.
Oh, I thought we had a correction to the bylaw.
I believe... Yeah, so the bylaw has a Schedule A in it that isn't in effect.
Just before people started asking questions.
Yeah.
And you had the right documents.
So can you just go back to your first slide? This one, yeah, sorry, the next one.
Okay.
So this is our
current.
current. So I'm just, my only concern is about this wording about the permanent connection to sewer pump out facilities for land-based sewage disposal. So there seems to be some discrepancy with what the applicant wishes to. So currently, to be able to meet the zoning, they need to put in a permanent connection. Okay.
And so that's why essentially in the zoning, what I try to do is say, or it meets the standard. So meaning that BC Float Home Standard, which refers to the 2 regulations, and to say, if you've met those regulations set out in the BC Float Home Standard, that would be acceptable to us as well.
So my only concern is I don't want the water already in the marina, I don't, in Stucco Park, I don't think is of the best quality. I don't want to see us adding additional. So I'd be in favor of perhaps the permanent connection.
Of holding to that standard.
Or that it exceeds
Right.
some sort of level, because I
Yeah.
just don't want us to be contributing to more pollution in the code. That was my only concern, however that is
Yeah.
dealt with. So have you had any discussions yet with Vancouver Coastal Health about what their jurisdiction is on this? Or is that comes up in referral?
Yeah, I've had numerous attempts over the months to get clarity, and I haven't got clarity from them.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're hoping through
I'm
the
hoping through the referral, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I guess that was just, if we can start to resolve that issue,
Mhm.
otherwise I'm very supportive of the application. That's my 2 cents.
Gary? Can you just go back to the housing agreement? So we got a little bit of an impasse there. So how's that gonna be resolved?
So, I mean, when I was looking at it, so both the APC and the EDC both made recommendations for stuff that can only be regulated through a housing agreement. So what I tried to do in the bylaw was say, okay, what can we regulate through the bylaw? And that was about the commercial guest accommodation. So
Oh, okay.
to meet
Yeah.
that up. But so if
Okay, that's
council,
how you go
if
about it.
council had wanted to regulate some of the things that they recommended, such as to say that they're staff housing, so that they're available for people, workers on Volun, or to say that to regulate the rents that they can be rented for, those can only be done through a housing agreement. So if council think those are things that they want to regulate, then the best thing is to make council to make that clear that that's something that actually, is an essential component of the rezoning.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Allison?
Couple of things. Yeah, I was quite sure about the rental. So the sewer, I mean, we're putting this on the table for first reading, is just putting it on the table for discussion. And I think the sewer or the on-site treatment plants, which are now getting very, very effective, can be dealt with as we move along. Is it the requirement of the building code to have a building permit?
That's our building bylaw.
Okay, but like, what happens if somebody takes one of the float homes from Falls Creek or Mosquito Creek or the Fraser River and brings it over here? Do they have to get a building permit?
I would think then they would apply similar to them moving a house onto Bowen. So like the new float home that went in that's closest to the ferry terminal,
Yeah.
we got a building permit. The floating office building permit, and I mean with the float home one, the recent one, we were unsure about it. Of course, what I've done and talked to our lawyers, no, we regulate buildings and structures within our jurisdiction. If you're building a building that you're going to occupy within our jurisdiction, it requires a building permit.
So he's got a building permit?
No. So, and that's where sort of the same, so, I mean, currently it's being built not in its location, so to occupy it would require a building permit.
Right.
And then we'd be looking at sort of how to do an inspection. So I know, like recently somebody was building a tiny house on their lot on Bowen. And that's permitted, it's a thing on wheels that you can build. They can't occupy it or use it, but if you're building it and moving it, that's okay. So as far as they're building a floating on the is okay, but if it's occupied and used, that becomes not okay without a building permit.
Okay, and then going into the bylaw itself, the map is wrong, which you
Yeah.
indicated, so how do we fix that to give it first reading?
So I would say just to amend it to remove Schedule A. So it was just been held over, but it's not, like the bylaw itself doesn't reference Schedule A in any form.
Okay, so you're not so Schedule A is part of the bylaw though?
So, I guess I would look for a motion to amend bylaw. Bylaw 461 to remove Schedule A.
And what do we replace it with?
With nothing, so the bylaw itself doesn't reference Schedule A.
Okay, all right, so I'll make that motion. Tyler, did you get what Daniel said?
I got bylaw 461 and removing Schedule A.
Be amended to remove Schedule A. I'll make that motion.
Second. Someone second that one?
You have to second it because Schedule A is Sunset Road.
It's just an error.
yeah.
It's an error.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
This is housekeeping to tie
Yeah,
that.
housekeeping issue.
Yes,
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. All those in favor?
yes. All in favor. I was gonna do it later, but no.
Well, then we've got that. Okay,
Yes.
now my second question is under 3.2. A maximum number of float duplexes is 4, and units in float duplexes is 8. Your report says 6 and
Yeah.
12.
I know, and I was just looking at that, and I'm not sure, but I would again probably look for a recommendation for housekeeping to change that to 6 and 12.
All right, so I'll move that under 3.2A, 4 be changed to 6, and under 3.2B, 8 be changed to 12.
Okay, I'll get a seconder and then I'll call for discussion before the question. I have a seconder. Did you want to discuss that before I call the question?
Well, I'm just confused about the numbers overall. In the on-table item 6.2H, Ron, the applicant, says that they are applying for 6 new floating structures, and that's in addition to the 3 units that they currently have. So is that captured in?
So I would say, because we currently allow up to 3 float homes, which would be the single unit buildings that they already have, and this would be to allow 6 float duplexes, which would say okay, you have 2 units in them. So they'd essentially be allowed 3 of one and 6 of the other.
So there's a potential for 9
Yeah.
altogether?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so how does that flow into the bylaw then?
So the bylaw isn't changing the float homes at all, and that sort of, with that provision remains, and then I'm adding, saying, okay, in addition to 3 float homes, you could have 6 float duplexes that allow multiple dwelling units, or the 2 dwelling units in each building.
Got it. Okay, and if some of it sounds as though they're kind of figuring things out as they're working on this pilot. Is the intention still that all of these units will be duplexes? I'm thinking about the changes to the upstairs, that there'll only be a storage loft and a balcony exit, and it's closer to a tiny house concept. I'm wondering about the terminology here. If we embed in the bylaw the language of a float duplex, when in fact what ends up getting built isn't a duplex.
Well, I'll just, the idea is that it's a 600 square foot footprint on the ground, divided into 2 units or possibly 1, depending on how big the unit is. If it's divided into 2 units, each will have a small loft above it and a small balcony now, rather than being 2 full floors. So they'll be sort of 400 square feet each or something, in the main floor and the upper floor. But it may not end up as 12 units if they decide to do bigger units, 2-bedroom units or whatever. They would then just have 1 unit per building.
So we're okay in that the bylaw states that there's a maximum number of dwelling units in the 6 duplexes that are being built.
I believe so.
Yeah. I mean, this housekeeping amendment that I'm making is just making Daniel's draft bylaw match his report.
Right.
But there's another question that Maureen has brought up, which is my next question.
Right, but let's just, if I may.
Let's deal with the housekeeping amendment.
Yes, please. If we could call the question on amending the wording in the bylaw, not passing the bylaw, amending the wording in the bylaw. If I can get it. It's taking it from 4 and 8 to 6 and 12.
What is the motion?
That the manager of planning and development amend bylaw 461, 2018, item 3.2A to 6 and 3.2B to 12.
Which matches Daniel's report.
Right.
Just making sure I was
I know.
connecting the dots.
That's why I want to get these do these as we go, rather than getting it as part of a larger discussion.
And we're okay with the terminology of float duplex?
Yes. For this point.
Yeah.
For first
right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So all in favor? Okay, so that's passed unanimous.
Okay, so
Now
my
back to this.
third question, which is picking up on what Maureen was raising and getting back to, if one of these float duplexes becomes a single occupancy thing, then it seems to me it fits the definition of float home.
Yeah,
And we've now already got 3 float homes.
yeah.
So we have,
Mhm.
we need some other wording that you can have a maximum of 9 floating
Units.
9,
Residential,
well, 9 complexes, which
9
would be a
structures.
mix, or 9 structures that would be a mix of float homes and float duplexes.
And sort of up to 15 units or something like that.
Yeah.
yeah, put
I
a
mean, I
mix
think then
Yeah.
maybe what I recommend then is we go forward with this, and that's something we bring for second reading.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so we need to deal with that as
Mhm.
part of something.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, but it simplifies it, I think, that
Yeah.
makes it
Yeah.
more straightforward.
Okay.
Okay,
Any more, Allison?
I think that's it.
Okay. I'll go to Michael.
No, I'm good with it.
You're good?
Yep.
Okay, Sue Ellen?
A couple of questions. First, I was going to ask you to go back to the same slide, same as Melanie. My concern is that the subject to permanent connection part of the current conditions of use, float house is limited to subject to the permanent connection, sewer pump out facilities for land-based sewage disposal. That's because right now, that beach at Crippen Regional Park, at the festival field, is closed every summer for different periods because of E. coli counts. And yet people go down to the water and they play, and I don't know how much or if any of that is related to the marina, but I know that over the years I have talked to at least one boat owning couple who didn't know that there were pump out facilities at the marina. So I just wonder about the previous floating structure, what's it called,
The officers.
that office, the thing that's at the end of the big floating building that's at the end of the
Yep.
gangway there. As I recall, being involved in the discussions at the time, although not on council, was that was part of the purpose of allowing that was so that the basin could be, the water quality could be improved. And if it's not, I'm wondering, is there a way to evaluate the uses that it's being put to now against the permit that it was allowed at the time? I would wonder, why isn't the water quality better? Perhaps it's all fine, but why didn't this boat owner company know, couple know, that they could dispose of sewage there? And anyway, so that's one thing. I'm also concerned about the kayaking company who has come forward to this council with concerns about the water quality earlier in Bowen Island Sea Kayaking, earlier in our term. So that's the issue about, that's that safety part. The next part is I'm concerned by the wording. The float home is at this pilot building, this one that's being built or has been built, is at the cusp restability. And that doesn't sound safe to me. And I'm just concerned that I read that the building inspector hadn't been there to see the different stages of development or construction of the building, and I'm concerned about that. The safety aspect of that building, or whatever, it sounds like it's being invented. And I don't have a problem with that, except that I want it to be safe, so whatever next comes. And then the third part is, how many of these, of the existing float homes are commercial guest accommodation now?
Zero.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Okay, because I had guests on the weekend who stayed at Rondy's Dock in a float home.
Oh.
So I just wonder about the uses and not wanting to be in, I think maybe a housing agreement might be a good idea, because my interest is in the staff being used for staff rental and the being used as they are said they were going to be used at. So those are my questions and concerns.
Okay. Maureen?
I've got two questions. The first one has to do with the applicant not being willing to sign a housing agreement. Why not?
I think it's just about levels of bureaucracy required to monitor the housing agreement in addition to all of these bylaws.
I see. This is a rezoning. And it's a rezoning of more than 3 units. And under our policy, housing agreements are required. Is that correct?
It requires a percentage to be affordable housing, and yeah, to be secured as affordable housing.
15%.
Yeah.
To be secured as affordable housing, or a contribution to a housing reserve fund once established.
Right.
So my point is that I'm quite uncomfortable with there not being recognition of our affordable housing policy in this rezoning, and it may be an issue for me down the line. It won't prevent me from voting in support of this at first reading, but I'd like to see some movement on that. And then the second point relates to the 6 months in which these units can be used for short-term rental purposes. So there could be potentially 12 units being used for short-term rental purposes. And my math on this is probably way off, but if you imagine occupancy of those units at 30% during that period, and conservatively at $100 a night, you're looking at in the neighborhood of $70,000 or so for the winter period. So we are, if we support this rezoning all the way down the line, we are supporting the creation of housing units for employees, which is terrific. But we're also supporting a lift in the value of the property for the owner. And given that, I am even more convinced that I want to see something related to our affordable housing policy in place. And at this point, I'm thinking that a contribution to an affordable housing reserve might be appropriate.
I'm going to jump in now that everybody's had a chance, and then we'll briefly go around for follow-up. In reference to the sewer, I think it's going to have to, it has to be hooked up to the community sewer system. I think there's going to have to be discussions with Snug Cove Sewer as to the volume that this may put in and how that is properly compensated and what effects it has on the long-term build-out of the sewer system. As far as water quality, it might be, certainly these small systems that you could put in there are very, very good. But for greater certainty for the community, possibly in the summer months, for 4 or 5 months of the year, we would require that it go through the sewer system so that there's no chance of effluent coming into the bay or the cove during the time that people could be using the water recreationally to swim or whatever. And basically, we are having 12 large hotel rooms, right? I mean, that's what this is 12 large hotel rooms that in the summer will probably be used by staff. And in the winter will be rented out as hotel rooms, whether they're rented out to visiting tradesmen or people coming for a wedding is kind of immaterial. They're commercial rental units. And so whether or not you consider these housing units and part of our affordable housing policy because he's creating 12 houses, you can think of it that way, or you can think of the uplift in the value of the property because of the investment that is being made there and the densification that is being made on the community. So those are the sorts of discussions I see us having between first and second reading on this, is trying to nail down those definitions and what they mean to the community. And I am like Maureen, I think that donation to the Affordable Housing Fund will give us a lot more bang for our buck, and that trying to create 15% affordable units in there would just be a fool's game. I agree with Ronnie on that one. That's not going to work out at all. But I think, I guess my basic point is we should think of this more as a commercial venture than as a housing situation. Anyway, follow-up comments?
Just very quickly, if I may. I understand where you're coming from, and I understand that. Just before we get contributions to this and contributions to that, one of the biggest struggles of this is to provide this at a cost where it can be reused for staff at a variable price. So I hope between first and second readings, just before we ask for this, that, and the other, we just have some honest discussions about what it is this is actually going to cost to do for something that we support. Because if we load it up with too many costs, you know, frankly, all you're going to be doing is you're going to be loading up the cost for the end user. And I don't see the win in that in this case. So I'm just saying, please, I get where people are coming from, not unreasonable, but please, could we also look at the other side of this equation and make sure we balance it so we don't, because any costs that go on one side will go on the other. So please, could we just look at that more reasonably when it's in between first and second? I'm actually rather hope we could actually move on.
And
Just a couple of comments. I believe the applicant mentioned that there's a marine engineer working with them on these projects, so I'm not the least bit concerned that they're not going to be safe. The other, I guess, is I don't think the applicant owns all the float homes that are down there. So I would move, where's the motion? Do I need the one from my yellow sheet, Tyler? I would move that bylaw number 461, 2018, cited in Bowen Island Municipality Land Use, bylaw number 57, 2015, bylaw number 461, 2018, be read first time, that council refer bylaw number 461, 2018 to the Almonds Trust, the Advisory Planning Commission, the Economic Development Committee, and Vancouver Coastal Health, and the council direct the applicant to hold a public open house to receive public input with regard to these bylaws prior to consideration of second reading of bylaw number 461, 2018.
Second.
Okay, any discussion before?
I forgot one point. There's no reason why the applicant can't hold the public open house down on site. He's got adequate space, and it would be better for the public to see. Thank you.
Okay, discussion before I call the question? You want?
This is a new idea to me, that the applicant doesn't own all the float homes down there.
Right.
Can you tell me, is there can there be other float homes there besides the ones that are not, that are permitted?
We regulate the amount of float homes that are there, and it's immaterial to us if they're owned by the marina or if somebody is essentially, a term is renting the space, say there's a boat that's tied up there permanently or the float is tied up permanently, it's immaterial.
It doesn't matter who.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so all in favor? So that's unanimous. Thank you. Moving right along. Next up, we have Daniel again with Solel Road, I believe. Yes.
There is a table.
Yes. Yes. Great file. So 391 Salal Road, rezoning application RZ05 2017. It's located on Salal Road, which is off of Sunset Road by Josephine Lake. It's in the RR3 zone, rural residential 3, and it's in the R1 rural OCP designation. So the applicant would like to rezone the property to remove the minimum average lot area regulations to allow the lot to be subdivided into 2 lots, each at least 1 hectare in size. So this came before council in the fall. It went to with ABC of the Parks and Trails. So the ABC had a couple of meetings about it. They held a site visit with the Parks and Trails meeting. So they At the February 26th meeting, they supported the rezoning and the proposed subdivision and community amenity that set up the trail through the property. They recommend the property owner ensures that the location, quality, dimensions of the trail easement are compliant with the Bowen Island Municipal Parks operation standard as a condition of the rezoning. And the Parks, Trails, Greenways Advisory Committee also considered this at 2 meetings. They held 2 site visits, so one with the APC and one with just the Parks Committee. And I've included in the report sort of a synopsis of their summary. So the proposed trail easement was walked and was beneficial to the municipality, and that their consideration be the easement be wider than 3 meters. So bylaws 459 and 460 would change the designation of the land to allow a 1 hectare minimum lot size, allowing the 2.5 hectare property to become 2 properties, each a minimum of 1 hectare lot size. In terms of next steps, staff recommend the applicant complete environmental assessment of the property, so identifying areas that would be appropriate to be protected, either as covenanted areas or as undeveloped parks prior to consideration of second reading. So the Parks and Trails identified the suitability of the trail through the property, but they also noted a couple sort of wetland areas in the property, and so just identifying those that either would be appropriate to be covenanted, similar to other properties in the area which have large covenant areas across them, or that would actually be better suited to be undeveloped parks. But making sure that in the 2.5 acre property that there's sufficient land for 2 1 hectare parcels. So a recommendation is to grant first reading to these bylaws, to refer the bylaws to the Islands Trust, to the APC, the Parks and Trails, and then rather than holding a public open house, we thought referral to adjacent landowners was sufficient. Yeah.
Okay, if I could start with a motion to adopt.
Can I just ask, do we need, because this has been provided on table and it's changing, put in, not row as provided on table, behind bylaw 459?
Sure. Okay. So what has changed on that, just to be clear, is so the clause 1 had still labeled industrial instead of R1 rural, and then the schedule A on the back is now labeled as indicated.
Okay. Thanks.
Housekeeping changes.
Kate, you got that noted?
Yes.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion before I call the question on this one? Let's start with Allison.
I'm just not totally, oh damn it, I've lost this thing now. Totally clear on, is the intention that the applicant build the trail?
That was, yeah, for the APC, that was their recommendation. They sort of discussed at length what appropriate amenity contribution, and they felt that the trail constructed the standards.
Okay,
Yes.
so it's just, so somehow before 4th reading, that'll get dealt with through a covenant or?
I think appropriate a covenant on title, such that prior to completion of subdivision, that it was built, so not built as part before rezoning be adopted, but before subdivision.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll have a covenant somewhere along the piece to look at. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion before I call the question? Okay, all in favor? First reading is hereby given. Thank you. All in favor, that's unanimous. Okay, staff reports, correspondence reports from our Metro Vancouver director.
The Parks Committee met last Wednesday, and the largest part of the Parks Committee work at the moment is wrapping up the park acquisition strategy. Metro Parks just celebrated its 50th anniversary, and they're engaged in planning for the next 50-odd years. So they're looking at areas for potential expansion or acquisition. Most of that discussion will take place in closed meetings. There will be a report that comes to the Metro Board at the end of June, if all goes well. Related to that, the Defend Island Forests Group and I and Parks Committee Chair Heather Deal met on the 12th of April, and the DIF group presented an overview on Crown Lands on Bowen Island. They have been invited, or are about to be invited, to attend the May 9th Metro Parks meeting as a delegation to give the committee members a sense of what the potential might be here. The board will meet this Friday, and it will be a lively board meeting. On the agenda is reconsideration of the salary increase, retroactive pay. There will be significant backpedaling, I imagine. So there is a motion on the table from Vice Chair Raymond Louie. It has to be approved by a simple majority weighted vote. So that means Bowen Island has something like 1 out of 500 votes. Then the motion to rescind has to be passed by a 2/3 majority weighted vote. My expectation is it will pass. And be well covered in the news.
It'll pass to be rescinded?
Your picture will be up there again,
Yeah.
your little hand popping up.
Yeah. Reading my computer.
Her hand
it
was
was
accomplishment, was like this.
Maureen, did you read the Vancouver province over the weekend? I couldn't bet, it's really...
Oh, the Mike Smith article?
Do you know something?
Yeah.
I've got to be honest, I looked at the front page and I put the paper down.
Okay.
But I see...
Let's not get into chatting.
No, I know, I just raised the question that it is putting in the mind of the general public Metro in an extremely negative light. And we better be aware of this. I mean, we have a Maureen who's our representative on this. This is not friendly reporting.
No, it's
I would
not
say
at all.
it is definitely hostile and targeted one.
Yeah.
So we better be aware that this stuff is out there. And in fairness to Metro, if they need to do some governance and act cleaning up, I really, 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 really hope that someone's got their ear out and doing it.
One quick, is the Metro meeting this Friday?
Yes.
So Saturday morning,
Councils
could be interesting.
Yeah, right. Okay, on to Islands Trust.
I've just got a couple of things. Trust Programs Committee met on Salt Spring Island, and they're looking at Salt Spring as a case study for somewhere where potentially services could be improved, perhaps with the help of the Islands Trust. So this is because Salt Spring Island turned down becoming a municipality in September in their referendum, but the Islands Trust, this committee that I'm on, is looking at, okay, well, how can we use this as a learning opportunity? How can we hear the Salt Spring Island people and make the Islands Trust work better if it can, legislature, what are the problems, that kind of thing. So we heard from them, they're being very organized over there in their governance committees and things like that. So I also went to the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities Convention. This is similar to the Lower Mainland Local Government Association, except it's Vancouver Island, our neighbors from Gibsons, Seashell, up and down Howe Sound were there. And Ian Wynn is on the board. So if we want, as a council, to for Bowen Island to be also a member of that one, we can ask. We've got somebody who knows us on the board. I bring your attention to 12.5 and the information agenda items. That was the little report from the Islands Trust Fund. So it's talking about
12.5?
12.25, did I not say? And, sorry, that's the, it talks about the different nature reserves that are being set up and worked on different committees. And at the end, it talks about the regional conservation plan. So that one's been passed now, and there's a bunch of new data and new maps relating to vegetation and ecosystems on and around Bowen Island. And they're going to be pulling those out, getting them ready to be put onto web pages. So that'll be probably for the communications committee or something like that. So that you know that's coming. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. Allison, anything for you?
Can I just ask one question about the Communications Committee? We are waiting to hear still if, I believe the Communications Committee were working on the activities or information for the general public on Islands Trust.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to do is, because I'm finding it hard to assemble all the info. I think it might be something that I'll talk more at the communications committee about. We were thinking about doing different things, but I don't have all the data that I need. So we may need to ask the Allen's Trust for
You might
specifically
need
what
to
I
ask
need.
me on the finance committee about some of the finance data.
Well, it wasn't that, was not what I was looking for, but I know I can ask you for that. It's true.
My understanding was the goal of this was to create a 1 or 2 pager.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
high level, lay
Yep.
down which.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a writing project, and I didn't have a timeline on it, so I'm doing it off the side of my desk like most things. Maybe you have, writing projects, they sometimes take a while.
With respect to the finance part of it, I have in my files, I found a very nice report that Craig Elder wrote before he retired as the director of finance over there that talks about how the allocation is calculated. It's nice, it's written in nice, easy English.
Well, I would love to see a copy of
So I
that,
just
if you,
dug it out, but keep forgetting to do it.
right.
Because
Okay.
Welcome a copy.
other things like 10.3 to waste our time on.
Okay, on that note of introduction,
Yeah, it was a good intro.
something else to waste our time on.
Yes.
Okay, so part of our strategic plan for 2018 is to further, I will just pull the thing up. Protect the shoreline, continue to work on dock regulation by drafting a bylaw that maps where docks are permitted. So this stems from, and Allison was kind enough to give us a handout this morning, which really very succinctly talks about this. Our bylaw used to say that a dock will not limit use of or physically divide a beach. In 2013, it was amended to read, will not impede pedestrian access along the beach. Now, this is something that I personally never agreed with. I always felt that having docks that physically divide beaches so that you can't play frisbee or whatever up and down that beach is something that we really don't want to have on the island. And even though the provincial standard for tenure over foreshore has the will not impede pedestrian access along the beach as their minimum criteria, I think it's appropriate that we have this further criteria physically dividing the beach. Now, we had discussed this as part of our strategic planning. We went to the planning department as to the number of hours that would be involved in working on a bylaw like this, and they said 15 hours. And given the constraints on the year and so on, we pulled that time from it. But I did speak to Chris Murdy about it, and we realized that what was primarily required was to rescind the changing of the bylaw in 2013, so that one line of wording is simply reverting back to the bylaw as it was before 2013. Now, the official community plan in 2011, or 2010, that changed the wording. We would, in conjunction with this, do another little bylaw amending that policy 76 or whatever it is, that specifically has this wording, and change that wording. That may not be necessary because your bylaws have to directly confront your OCP before it's deemed to be inconsistent with it. So that is an opinion thing from Chris, but if it is contradictory enough, we would do that one-line amendment in the OCP. Now, the other thing is whether or not we want to expand the definition of what constitutes a beach. Sand, gravel, exposed seabed, level for a distance of, or exposed for a distance of whatever from the high water mark at a given tide. So you would say something like, if the sea bottom is exposed for a distance of 10 meters at a 6-foot tide, it would be by definition a beach. Anything exposed less would not be considered a beach except for, and you might list off Bowen Bay Beach, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just suggesting some of the things that have to be thought of before this is put to bed. But I do believe that it can be done at a minimal expense with a minimum amount of time involved. And the first step is to get a resolution from council allowing me to go forward with this and working on it with the lawyer and reporting back to council as to what would be involved as far as what would it cost, how long would it take, what would be our process. And then I could give you a work plan and a budget on it. So that's basically my presentation, and I want to request the resolution that council instruct staff to begin preparation of a bylaw to amend land use bylaw number 57, 2002 to prohibit docks across beaches, recreational foreshore, and adjacent to public access to the ocean. Yes.
Are you moving?
I move that.
I second.
Okay. And just in the way of discussion before I call the question, that specific wording was recommended by Chris as being constrained enough that it's not prohibiting docks, but broad enough that it will encompass what may come out of these definitions of what is a beach. Okay, further discussion?
Yeah,
and then come around.
Sure. I just want to say I seconded this. I support this initiative because I'm concerned about our public beaches, our public access to water, and the beaches that people love on Bowen in the summer and in the winter. And I think currently the way the bylaw is written by not impeding public access means you can, as long as you can walk underneath a dock, it's okay.
Or over.
Or over, or, you know, around it at some tides. So my worry is that some places like Pebbly Beach, for example, in Deep Bay or something like that, 10 meters setback from the side is the length of one school bus on each side from that narrow public access down to the road. There could be docks that you'd need to walk underneath. And so those are the kinds of public beaches that I'm most concerned about, are the ones that are in high use now. I also think as the island is developed and the population grows, that there will be other public beach accesses that might not be highly used now, but might be used in the future. And I also, anyway, so that's why I'm supporting this. I think it needs exploring. I think that would be, that particular one has really bothered me, and I think the foreshore is it's public. It's valuable. Everything between the high tide line and the low tide line is public now, like an artificial turf field or something that we might put thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in over the years. This is self-sustaining, and it's somewhere that everybody can go. Waterfront property owners, young people, people from everywhere can go and use, and I think we should protect it. So that's why I'm in favor.
Maybe I'll go to Maureen and then come around, okay?
I think the concern around this is going to be its breadth and whether it's going to constrain dock construction everywhere. And I know that that's not the intent. So when staff come back with a report on, or when whoever comes back with a report on the time required and the issues that need to be resolved and so forth, I'd like that question to be addressed. You know, just how broadly is this being conceived as a restriction?
Right.
Because I could imagine someone arguing that if you prohibit dock construction across beaches, recreational foreshore, adjacent to public access, is given all of the public accesses to the beach that we have, that there's nothing left. And I know that's not the case. So I think it has to be very, very clear if this goes forward that you're not seeking to prohibit dock construction everywhere.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. And that obviously is not the intent to.
Yes, but I just think it needs to be really underscored from the get-go.
Yes. Anything, Melanie?
I think I'm in support of the recommendation. I just think just one amendment would be, just at the end, and like staff report back to council. I think if we could get a report back from staff.
She's just proposing to add at the end and that staff report back to council.
Okay, and that will probably come through Kathy, actually. I mean, this would be Kathy and I and Chris working on this. So because of our desire to not tie up a lot of planning department time on this. Okay, but sure. Sorry, I don't have those.
I'm just wondering if there's a little bit though, if we tend to leave more on the staff side, then there's a little bit more objectivity from it.
There's a little more
objectivity about it. It just might help with defining the terms of the eventual bylaw. So that's why maybe just asking to get a staff report back, and then we can move it through that way.
Okay, but keep in mind, as I said, keep in mind the staff in this case is Kathy, as opposed to the planning department unless she decides to do it that way. But I'm basically working on her recommendation as to how this should be handled. Fair, but do you want that in the resolution? Do you want to do a friendly amendment to the resolution, or I mean, because this is very, this is council instructing staff to begin preparations, all this is.
I wouldn't mind a staff report coming back.
Okay, so propose it as an amendment to the resolution?
She said at the end, where it says ocean, instead of the period, and that staff report back to council.
Oh, thank you. You got it, Tyler.
Do you want to be specific about staff or the chief administrative officer?
CAO, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
The CAO. That's what I have.
Okay.
Okay.
Report back to council.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Yeah, I'll consider it a friendly amendment, and we won't bother.
Okay.
That's okay. You're on here.
Yeah, so eventually we were going to go down this road, and apparently we're hitting the highway here. And my original intent was, and I was quite happy with the fact that there wouldn't be docks over public beaches. What I have a real problem with here is the ongoing assault on the waterfront property owners, that they can't enjoy perhaps their, the luxury of putting out a dock in front of their homes or whatever. They're basically being disenfranchised. There will be, depending on what comes back, and we have to wait and see what staff comes up with, I have a real problem with a recreational foreshore, a definition. Super big problem with that. And again, we'll have to see how that is defined. Across public beaches, I don't have a problem with, but across extended beaches, and to not allow somebody to put up in a higher dock that's not impeding traffic, so you're going backwards again, to really disenfranchise these people. Anyway, I have a huge problem with it. We'll probably vote to just go ahead with it here at this point in time. This will be the single most divisive project on the island if it goes ahead
without doubt.
In an extended form. I can guarantee you.
Yes, promise you that.
Yeah.
Yes, there's one reason why this is 3.5 years into our mandate. There are a few issues like this where the rubber has to hit the road at some point, right?
Yeah, it's just, if it's handled properly, it'll be fine. If it's not handled properly, like I said, there'll be an absolute uproar.
Yeah,
so,
fair enough.
And even going back and changing, the OCP and the bylaw is a move in the wrong direction.
Well, Gary said if it's handled properly, it'll be fine, and as far as I'm concerned, this is not handling it properly.
Yes.
You're talking about staff reporting back and saying what's involved and what has to be done, yet the direction in the motion is preparation of a bylaw.
Yes.
Now, bylaw 335, we thought was pretty simple. We were acting on direction in the OCP. It took a lot of time to wade through those definitions. Here's my doc file. 75% or 80% of which is bylaw 335, which took over a year to do, numerous discussions and conversations. There is no way this thing, and we just had a bylaw from Rondi that we heard about 6 months ago, and he needs the accommodation for this summer. No wonder he's building a float house in his parking lot. I mean, and the Salal one we heard about 5 months ago. Planning staff is busy. They've got to finish the roads and streets. There's tons of things they need to do. They do not need any more time. I thought we'd agreed that this second phase under the strategic plan was the bottom of the priority list. The other is to have the mayor dealing with legal counsel on this is totally the wrong process. I mean, totally taints the bias and not independent and open mind and everything else. Now, the recommendation is so all-encompassing. I mean, recreational foreshore, in this definition, you said most of the beach islanders, you can walk on something at low tide. What is recreational for? And they all public accesses to the ocean. Well, how many of those have we already got? Is it the unbuilt one? Is it the ones that aren't usable? And the lot already, at 10 meters, is well over 100 feet. And with the way the lot lines and the heights of the docks.
No, I don't think it is.
30 off.
Oh, 3, right, okay, sorry about that. And then in your report, you say reinstate the prohibition on dock construction across public beaches. Well, I would argue that physically divided means you can't get around it. It doesn't mean there's a dock there. And it would be really fun to play Frisbee amongst the pilings. Challenge. I mean, that's great. So it's not simple and straightforward. It's totally the wrong time to start on something that is going to need a lot of public information, consultation.
Well, it's going to take a while.
And a lot of staff time, and it's not something that should be done and legal counsel directing. And if the staff report we want is what would be involved to do this, I can call out a whole bunch from the bylaw 335 one. I think this is totally the wrong thing, and I'm voting against this.
Fair enough.
Yeah. All right, I have to tell you, when I saw this on here, I was so disappointed. Really, not because the intent isn't good. I think I can credit you that the intent probably is genuine. But really, at this point in our tenure as council, we have so many important things to do and some building blocks to finalise. I am sorry, and it just seems something that I just honestly at this stage would not even countenance. And I'm troubled also with you working with a lawyer, and I just see this going horribly, forgive me, I see this going so horribly sideways. It's not that I want to vote against the intent on this one, I just think that the timing is wrong. And I think we've got some other things in the remaining, 6 months that we have left? Do we have 6 months left? 3? No? Well, really?
Yeah, getting down to it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, May, June, July, August, September, well, October, good luck. Good luck. So, I don't want to personalise, I'm really trying not to personalise it. I just think the timing is horrible, and I'm asking us not to proceed with this at this moment in time. I just think we'll blow a fuse somewhere in this office. I just think it's unreasonable.
I think if I could just respond to that, since it was very personalized. It's in our plan for this year. It may not go through council this year. It may be a major issue in the upcoming election. It might be a defining issue in the upcoming election. But it's something that I ran on when I was elected, that I wanted to reinstate the prohibition on docks across beaches, and I'm pleased that I'm able to work on that now. And as far as it gets, it gets. And if it doesn't get all the way through, it doesn't get all the way through this year. But it doesn't mean you don't do it because you can't do it within a given time frame.
It's progress.
Yeah, and it's an issue that I feel is long overdue. So, given the lateness of the hour, can I call the question? All in favor? And those opposed? Okay, thank you. Now, we had something pulled from the consent
3.8.
agenda.
Okay, the reason, okay, so, I want just I think given, that there are some other applications already in the hopper, that the motion should be that council accept the resignation of Maya Sismaski from the Economic Development Committee, and that a thank you letter be sent acknowledging their service, her service, period.
Okay, and that, given the nature of consultations on these things, I would prefer that we simply leave it at that, rather without discussion, and pass it.
I second that.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Pass unanimous. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, and nice to have it over. Okay, I do believe that we are able to adjourn, and then we are going to go into a closed meeting after about a 5-minute break. Sure. Okay, we are adjourned, and I'm not even.
You first.